Hey, Andrew.
Yes, Stephen?
You know how we romanticize the days of going out to our local video store and sifting through endless amounts of movies, searching for our favorite films, and maybe even finding some hidden gems?
Oh yes, I know it all too well. That used to be my favorite thing to do. Unfortunately, everything is online now.
Well, what if I told you that there was a place online where you could get some of them same thrills as going to the video store?
Are you talking about Orbit DVD?
I knew you knew what I was talking about. Orbit DVD is located in Asheville, North Carolina, and online with OrbitDVD.com, they bring you everything your physical media heart desires.
Yeah, they have an awesome website that stays up to date with the latest releases from all of your favorite boutique labels as well as studio releases. Not only do they carry American labels such as Criterion Collection, Severin Films, Vinegar Syndrome, and Warner Archive, but they get routine shipments on imports from companies such as 88 Films, Arrow Video, Imprint, and so much more.
And with the option to sell or trade your used copies for cash or store credit, they really bring that video store vibe to you. So go to OrbitDVD.com and stock up on your Blu-rays.
And tell them Chasing Labels sent you.
Welcome to another episode of Chasing Labels. I am your host, Stephen Billings, and as always is with me, your other host, Andrew Cabral. How you doing, man?
Doing good, Stephen. Doing good. Glad to be back. Once again, we are back this week. Man, it's going to be a fun-filled week here on Chasing Labels. What spy number are we on now?
It's gonna take a week to talk about all this.
Yeah, I'm just going to say this may be a week-long episode. But what is this? This spy number 59, I believe?
59.
59. Cool. So, yeah, well, how are you doing? I know things have been kind of wild in your life lately.
Yeah, the baby's doing good. Wife's doing, she's doing the best she can with lack of sleep. But everybody's good here. We're just settling into the routine. That's the big thing about a new baby that I hear is that just getting that routine down. And it's getting there. She's starting to recognize that nighttime is the time to sleep. A little bit. So
the internal clock is working, I guess.
Yeah. I guess it changes. I guess it changed with you over time. Now you don't sleep at night.
No.
Or you don't sleep at all.
I'm more nocturnal now than anything. I'm more,
it changes.
More machine now than man.
Yeah.
They say. but this week is a big week. Like we said last week in our predictions that a lot of the companies saved all of their releases for seemingly this second to last week of July. And yeah, it's action-packed this week. But as always, well, not always, but sometimes we have a guest coming on this week and came at a fortuitous time for one of the things we're going to cover this week when it comes to the Indicator release. But Stephen, who do we have on this week?
Well, he's a freelance writer. He also is contributed and produced many releases through a variety of labels. He's done some work with Arrow Video. He's done work with Eureka. He's kind of I think done a lot of his work with Indicator Powerhouse, which, like he said, Andrew alluded to. He will be able to elaborate more on that release of that box set that they have this week, and that is Michael Brooke. How you doing, man?
Hello, I'm fine, and thank you for having me on.
Yeah, you're coming from the UK, right?
Yes.
It's nighttime there. Is how's the weather? I know this is a weird conversation that people have when they're like just getting to know each other and they ask about the weather. I like to do that because I know it breaks the ice. Yeah.
Well, we broke the all-time temperature record on Tuesday.
Oh wow!
Not where I was, incidentally, but elsewhere in the UK. So global warming has been much in the news.
It's doing its thing.
Then we had just massive monsoon-style storm yesterday, and things are more or less back to normal. So that's
funny enough, that's kind of happening where I'm at. I'm in North Carolina, and it was I think the whole week was around 100 degrees, and then suddenly yesterday it just had a really nice storm. It cooled things down a little bit. Now it's back to hot again. So, but I don't know about your area, but North Carolina weather is always unpredictable.
You talking about me or just
no, Michael?
I think UK weather is very different than here.
we don't really do extremes.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why this was so.
When extremes happen, like the record temperature, like the October 1987 hurricane, stuff like that, we're usually in a state of shock because sort of thing isn't supposed to happen.
It's like when Texas got hit with that storm and then they lost their power.
The freezing temperatures and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's very interesting that you bring that up because I saw all kinds of articles earlier this week, or maybe just people talking. I don't know. I get them confused. Where the UK, like you said, Michael, doesn't really have the infrastructure to handle 104 degree Fahrenheit heat. I don't think many places do.
No. And I remember the last time we had reasonably heavy snowfall, which was about 12 years ago, and the country ground to a halt, of course, and people were saying, well, Russia can do it, Canada can do it, why can't we? Well, Russia and Canada spend gazillions on snow clearing because they have to. It's an absolute necessity, whereas we have snowfall like that once in a blue moon, and in fact, we haven't had snowfall, certainly not where I live, that heavy since then. So it would be a total waste of money, and that's why we don't have it, and that's also why we tend to have problems with extreme weather because it's not in our experience.
It's I love the weather. But let's get off the weather. We're going to switch from the weather channel to the boutique label channel. But as usual, we like to, we're going to talk to Michael about what he's been involved in his career. So we like to always start from the very, very, very bottom. Where did that love of movie start for you?
Well, I knew you were going to ask me this. So, yes. And it's not something I'd ever really given much thought to before. I think because I wasn't especially into them. I mean, I remember, I have childhood memories. I remember seeing Golden Voyage of Sinbad when it first came out, which was amazing. I remember an 8th birthday treat to see The Land That Time Forgot. Obviously I thought saw all the big tentpole things. I remember seeing Star Wars.
What's funny about this is you're just naming. I think you're half advertising indicator because these are indicator releases. I'm just saying. I'm just kidding.
One of them is, and that was great fun. Really, it's the first indicator release I ever worked on, and it was really nostalgic because I hadn't seen it. But no, we haven't done The Land That Time Forgot, despite lots of requests, and obviously we haven't done Star Wars, and I'm not going to. But yeah, I don't think it was. I was much more into sort of reading and music and stuff like that. And then I think when I was 11, I went to a different school and I had to commute by tube train. And when you do that, you spend a lot of time hanging around on stations, and overwhelmingly the advertising is film posters. And up to then, naively, I thought that my local cinema showed everything. I've no reason to assume otherwise because it's not something I've given any thought to. And then you realize actually there's a whole world out there of really interesting looking things that aren't coming anywhere near where I live. And there were, school library had sort of various film magazines. I remember Films and Filming was very popular because it had a staggering amount of nudity in the illustrations. That was to an extent that you probably never get in a mainstream film magazine now. And start reading about things and think, well, these sound interesting. And then 1980, I was very lucky in that my dad was farsighted enough to see where home computers were going. And so we got one. I don't know about the US, but certainly in the UK, 1980 was way ahead of the curve. And we didn't because we didn't have a computer monitor. We had a sort of 12-inch color portable television set, and it went in my room because there was space. And so of course I immediately rigged it up to an aerial and started watching things late at night, which is great. I mean, that's where I discovered things like foreign language films, because for the practical reason that to avoid detection by parents, I could keep the volume down to a really low level. I realized again, as a sort of male teenager, I discovered there was probably likely to be more gratuitous nudity in foreign language films because that's the way British censorship works. It's it's the
swap, but we've always talked about that. Like here, it's about censoring nudity, and then it's violence over there.
Yeah. So yeah, and then gradually it got to the point where I was quite regularly having trips into the middle of London to see things. I mean, really precociously, I saw Andrei Tarkovsky's Stalker when I was still 13.
Jeez.
But as a result, I wish I knew what the review was that persuaded me to go and see that, because I have a feeling it was very much a kind of, it's very much in the sort of describing it in the sort of Star Wars Close Encounters thing, and the kind of thing that I might, cringe at if I read today, but it got me in. I did think for a long time it was a review in the Guardian by Derek Malcolm, and then I looked it up and it wasn't. So I don't know what it was. But I remember watching it. And I was thinking, and obviously it's way ahead of anything I'd done. I watched before in terms of sort of being conceptually challenging. But at the same time, I was thinking, well, this is really you can do things with this art form that I never really thought of before. And from then on, I was paying close attention to Time Out, which back then was really a major player in terms of getting people interested in films. There was this was all the early 1980s when the London repertory cinema scene was still very much going through its golden era. So you can go and see a triple bill of things for and because you had to see all three films, otherwise you wouldn't get your £2.50 worth. So it was a really great way of catching up with things on 35mm on the big screen. We didn't have a VCR at home for ages. And sort of took off from that. I just would see something in Time Out saying, "Oh, that looks interesting. Go and see it." And then I started sneaking into films underage to what were then X, now 18 certificate films in 1983. I was lucky enough to be 6'2" at a very early age. So, yeah. And I realized my great epiphany actually was when we were on a school sort of summer camping trip in the summer of 1982. And the last night we were driven off to the local cinema, and it was a twin screener, and it was showing Porky's and Rocky 3. And we were obviously all expected to go and see Rocky 3. But needless to say, we all tried to get into Porky's. And it must have been really, really, really obvious to the cashier that we were all part of the same group and all underage. But being a very sensible woman, and I would have done exactly the same thing, she thought, well, okay, well, if I can get everyone who more or less looks the right age in, they get to pay double, full adult rate, and therefore the cinema will make more money. So I was one of the ones who got in. And I thought, well, that was easy.
And back when people didn't, back when people didn't sue everybody for everything,
Well, that was it.
Theaters would be like, yeah.
We also didn't have any kind of sort of standard recognized ID. We still don't in many ways, but
yeah.
And cinema, as I found out when I managed the cinema later, the cinemas don't care unless you're actually wearing a school uniform and sort of short trousers and so on. They want your money.
Yeah,
exactly. This was also the time when the British cinemas were in an absolutely dire state financially. I think 1984 was the worst year for film emissions in British history, and it was only when the multiplex building started becoming a big thing afterwards that they managed to claw that back. So they were basically letting in anyone, quite rightly. So from 15, I was seeing. You often got to see they often had double bills. And you would see something recent with something a few years older. And often it was the 3 years older one that I wanted to see. So, for example, I went to see X-Ray because it was playing in a double bill with Scanners, which I hadn't seen.
Nice.
That kind of thing. And I absolutely devoured. You see things like Lucio Fulci double bills on the big screen back then. It was quite extraordinary. That repertory cinema golden age carried. Oh yeah, and also Channel 4, which was incredible in the 80s.
Yeah.
It was, it all came to a screeching halt with the 1990 Broadcasting Act, which forced them to sell their own advertising. But back then, when they were piggybacking off the much bigger ITV channel, they took the most insane. I mean, they were show things like an hour-long documentary on Jan Schwankmeyer at a time when nobody in Britain knew who he was. That's just unimaginable today.
It's like back then. I mean, there was people that were, you weren't part of. It was like the people that were in charge were the informed, and they just wanted to inform everybody. But now, it's all about It's all about putting programming out for young people. It's not about being educational in a broader sense for everybody to learn something they might not have seen. Now it's all about the new thing.
I think, and to be fair, I think there is also the attitude that, because I read the memoirs of Jeremy Isaacs, who was the first director of Channel 4, and he said he was really evangelical about Channel 4 showing, sort of independent cinema, sort of foreign language cinema and so on, because outside London and major cities, it was simply not possible to see this stuff. Now, of course, it's easy. And so there's less need for the sort of major network TV channels to do it. BBC Two also used to do a lot of subtitle stuff. They had a sort of slot called the Film Club, which is a double bill thing, and that was brilliant. There was In fact, they'd actually show things, correctly framed, which was again very unusual in the 80s.
That's important for Andrew.
Yeah, very much so. I'm
frame rate,
aspect ratio enthusiast.
Yes, yeah. Well, I mean, back in the 1980s, 99% of what was shown on television was reformatted to fit your screen.
Oh yes, the dreaded words, which I never kind of computed them until I got much older. I'm like, what? Oh, so that means they're just the kind of like stretching.
Well, I remember when I was watching John Carpenter's The Fog on its original release, and I saw the screen just go. And I thought, it's a different shape. I never realized that before. Obviously, I'd seen loads of,
I mean, for a lot of
occurred to me that it was a different shape from a television.
Yeah, for a lot of younger listeners, I don't think they have to deal with those things now because those square, 4:3 standard aspect ratio TVs are long gone. But back, I remember in the 90s, some VHS tapes would come in widescreen and people would be baffled by the bars on the top and the bottom, and they thought there was something wrong with the VHS tapes.
And sometimes, I mean, I actually got a refund on a tape because it was my then girlfriend's favorite film. I bought her a copy of Hellraiser, and they promised on the back 40% more picture. Only problem with that was it wasn't actually shot in anamorphic widescreen, and in fact, because it was shot in, I think 166 or something, there was actually slightly less picture.
Oh gee!
And the sort of open map video thing. And so my girlfriend looked and she said, "What's this?" And I took it back and changed it for something else because it was. And I remember, it was another widescreen tape. It was Master of the Flying Guillotine, and what they'd done is that they'd taken the pan and scan VHS version and they cropped it at the top and bottom. It was absolutely unwatchable. I'd never seen it in widescreen before. I've only just.
This is why we love the boutique labels so much. That they this is important. This stuff this is the horror stories.
It's important. I mean, we've heard other guests talk about. One of our guests said he watched Rebel Without a Cause on a plane, and it was in 4:3, and that's like modern day. And I'm still like baffled that modern day. It even got to the point where I think, even just up to a few years ago, like premium cable, like things like HBO and stuff like that, were still showing stuff in the wrong aspect ratios when it came to their broadcasts. And it's only been within the last couple of years that they've fixed those things.
We have occasionally sent masters in the wrong aspect ratio, and obviously noticed every time. But it's if you don't notice and you're not aware of, you're not looking out for this, and especially if you've got obviously a huge turnover of masters as a sort of television show. We only handle sort of 4 or 5.
Yeah, and in that case, I mean, you kind of have to. In that case, do you have to kind of work with what you have, or do you try to pursue the correct master?
No, we go back and say, can we have the correct one, please? I mean, sometimes there was a case where Sony sent us. It was Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger, and Sony sent us the older version and not the restored version, and we didn't know enough about. Because we were totally focused on Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, which is this new restoration, and we just took it on trust that Sony would send us the right version, and they didn't.
Yeah, what I find so interesting is that it seems in the 1950s is when there's a lot of these aspect ratio issues kind of come up because of the transition from kind of the standard Academy ratios to the widescreen, depictions in the theaters. That's where when you go back to a lot of these modern Blu-ray releases, we have a lot of these questions.
Oh, absolutely, yes, and it's sometimes. I mean, it's people like Bob Firmanek have done a wonderful job in trying to come up with actual documented evidence of what aspect ratios they were. But even then, it's not necessarily correct because Night of the Demon, they're one of the greatest indicator box sets of all time. According to Bob's research, it was 1:8:5, standard American widescreen ratio. According to my eyes and the eyes of the rest of the team, 1:8:5 is too tight. Actually, it's fine, mostly fine. But there's that one scene by the fireplace where you are actually cropping off people's eyes, and you clearly want to. And when the BFI did their own restoration, they because they didn't have any firm. This is before Bob's research. They didn't have any firm documentation, and they reckon 1:7:5, which was the standard British widescreen ratio. They reckon that was probably the most effective, and I agree with them. I think that is probably correct, but then Sony's masters were 1:66, so I don't know what that was based on. And when we actually compared the Sony master with the BFI master, the BFI one had more information on the other sides, So we couldn't create a 175 thing out of the 166 thing without cropping the picture more than we wanted. So in the end, we just threw it all on the disc. I mean, I think it's got about 7 versions of the film, that disc.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, six official ones, and then there's an Easter egg where you get the BBFC censored version.
And the film also had, I think, 2 different titles as well, depending on which part of the world it was released.
And there's a huge myth, which I'm afraid I still see to this day, and I get very boring about correcting people, but it is quite important. The myth is that the UK got the long version of the film called Night of the Demon right from the start, and the US got the short version called Curse of the Demon right from the start. And that's basically the situation. It wasn't like that. The differences between Night of the Demon and Curse of the Demon, which exist in short and long versions, is one sentence. In the opening voiceover, for some reason, there's one sentence missing from Curse of the Demon. And then, of course, the titles. But then after the titles, the long version of Night and the long version of Curse is exactly the same, and the short version of Night and the short version of Curse is exactly the same. And the short version is what got released initially. Long version didn't get dug up until the 70s. In the UK, it had its British premiere on television in 1980. It's got a very complicated production history, and we're actually very lucky that the long version survived, because it might not have done under quite a few circumstances. But yeah, it's one of the reasons why we threw in so many different versions, because we just wanted to give people a choice. Although the menu does default to the longest cut of Night of the Demon, which is the longest version of the film, and that clearly should be the first choice of anyone.
Yeah, that would be the cut that you want to watch. But when I was also thinking of other 1950s films that have kind of had the modern, kind of look at, I was thinking of On the Waterfront, which I know the Criterion has, I think, 2 or 3 different aspect ratios.
It's three. It's one Academy 137, 166, and I think 185. And it's it is really interesting exercise, because back then it was all up in the air, and cinemas hadn't necessarily converted to widescreen, and so there were various ways that they could show it. And I would say my personal preference with that film is 166, but it's good that they've offered a choice, because that's for various usually.
And I think a lot of productions, including On the Waterfront, were shot to cover all of those aspect ratios. Like they were so just in case they were shown theatrically in different versions, you wouldn't see a boom pole off in the screen. People would be framed in a certain way. And
that was true later as well with Hammer films. Hammer films were because they were made for the international market. They were made for continental Europe, in which 166 was the main widescreen aspect ratio. They were made for the UK, which 175 was the standard aspect ratio, and they were made for the US, in which 185 was the standard aspect ratio. So they generally shot them in 166, but allowed for cropping to 185. Which is why they tend to, unless they're actually in anamorphic widescreen, they tend to look fine in whatever ratio. Which is why when we put the Hammer boxes together, we're provided it's somewhere between those 2 ratios. We're really not that fussed, because it's it's always looked absolutely fine. And it's quite difficult to be purist when they were allowing at the time for
very much so. I think us here on the podcast, maybe our listeners in general. The movie Marty, starring Ernest Borgnine, just got a Blu-ray re-release, which we covered when it got announced, but it is being given to us in 2 aspect ratios of 133:1 and 185:1, because the original Kino release was in 133:1, and people were very much up in arms about it, because there was a lot of debate over how it was originally depicted in the theaters, and apparently it was depicted in both ways. But if anyone's seen the 133:1, the framing doesn't look quite as right, and the 185:1 also, I think, has its issues as well, from what I understand. So I don't know, that's just very interesting, just how these things were done.
It is getting the aspect ratio right can be a real challenge. Sometimes it's straightforward. If it's anamorphic widescreen, sort of shot through an anamorphic lens with a squish picture, it's obvious, that's easy. But if it's pre 1952, again, easy. It's
very much so.
Very few exceptions, and the exceptions are things like Abel-Gance's Napoleon, which are famous exceptions, so that's not a problem. But after that, and particularly in the 50s, it does get messy. And
I remember even early US Blu-ray releases over 10 years ago, they would have a slightly different aspect ratio. Like if a film was in 185:1, they would release the Blu-ray in 178:1 and kind of open it up.
They opened it up.
Warner Brothers. Slim.
Yes, it's not.
It's negligible.
isn't digital, and it's probably, you know, yeah, I mean, presumably they're working. This film would have been shot open matte, so they're actually opening it up rather than cropping it. So you actually get slightly more picture for what, you know, for what that's worth. I'm not really that fussed about the differences.
Yeah, that as purist as I am, but you know, 185 to 1 to 178 to 1 isn't.
We've been sent 178 to 1 masters, and we have very slightly cropped them to 185 because why not?
This podcast is sounding like mathematicians or something.
Yeah, I know.
Yes, I do apologize. My work these days.
That's as far as my math skills go. Is aspect ratios. I couldn't formulate any of these things. I'm pretty sure there's mathematics that go behind these things when it comes to the physics of how to frame a movie. That's not stuff that I get into. I'm just more of I guess the exhibition of it fascinates me because for the longest time we were probably watching movies not as they were intended to be seen. It's only been within the last 20 years of the digital, you know, DVD age that we've gotten to actually see these movies.
And now we're
on home video for the correct version for the first time.
And of course, now we're seeing them in a quality that, you know, unless you were lucky enough to catch either the premiere or very, very soon after the premiere, you're seeing it in a quality that's a sort of level of pristineness that you absolutely would not have seen. I mean, I grew up watching things in London repertory cinemas where the prints were absolutely battered to hell, because usually there was only one print left in commercial distribution. They would destroy loads of others, and then they would just keep one in circulation, maybe one or two for further bookings, but to save on the storage.
Yeah,
that's why I felt that, you know, films which went on general release with loads of prints, that's how they vanish.
Yeah. That tends to be the history of cinema. Is the studios are like, well, we need to save money. Well, let's just toss a bunch of stuff in the river,
or sell them to an archive, and they'll just sit for decades upon decades in less than ideal conditions. We've talked about that with you know, some archivists and stuff like that on here, where stuff just gets lost over time. You know, we've said it so many times, like the silent era. I'll say this again, like 80% of that era is gone, 90% of that era is completely gone, just because they didn't save anything, and now we're going back, and it's like, where's everything?
I mean, we're very lucky. We're really lucky with Buster Keaton because of the famous thing where James Mason bought a house that he used to own and found all, you know, print, in some cases the only prints of his stuff in the basement, and was savvy enough to. Harold Lloyd, of course, was a famous pioneer in film preservation, which is why his stuff is not only still survives, but still survives in remarkably good condition, because he took film preservation seriously. But a lot of the time, you know, the filmmakers weren't really involved with this. They thought the studios would look after it. They didn't. This is TV, not film, but there's a really famous comedy sketch show with Peter Cook and Dudley Moore called Not Only But Also. And they, in the early 1990s, I think, they agreed to sort of introduce a compilation which was going to be called The Best of What's Only Not Only But Also. And when they discovered how little of it still survived, they insisted on changing it to The Best of What's Left of Not Only But Also.
And that was their own work.
That was their own work, yeah. But
my goodness, imagine BBC, like, you've done things in your career, and then you go back, and it's like, it's gone.
Gone. And television, it's you know, 50. I don't know about the US, certainly in Britain, 50s television is basically live theatre. Very little recorded. 60s it gets better because they invented videotape by then, but even then they were very selective. Light entertainment usually didn't survive very long.
I think it's very much true. I know US television history is rather different. I mean, very much studio, very much shot on film. Yes, but I think the main issue is going back into those archives and restoring those types of things is very, very expensive. That's why we don't see a lot of those in high definition for like home video consuming. They've tried very, many times, and it's just too expensive, I guess.
Yes. And I mean, in Britain, a lot of it wasn't shot on film, and we're actually extraordinarily lucky in the films that Ken Russell made for the BBC. Virtually all of them survive. I think only one is lost, and there's about 33 films because they were shot on film, and because he had his own 16mm prints created. So, and there was a sort of consolidation exercise around about 2007 between Ken Russell and the BBC and the BFI and they discovered that virtually everything still survived, which is an incredible track record for someone active on British television in the 60s.
Yeah, and speaking of BFI, I do want to, I know you worked there for a long time. Please tell us about that experience and when you got into there and everything.
Okay, well, I'll jump back to my professional career, which has been more or less the same thing. I mean, film curation, contextualization, presentation for about 33 years now. 1989, I it was an ad in the back of Time Out.
Great year, by the way.
Oh,
it's the year I was born.
What a shot.
I could read between the lines there. The 1989, there was an ad in the back of Time Out for the Everyman Cinema, which is, one of my favorite repertory cinemas, was advertising for an administrative assistant. And I thought, okay, I just dropped out of university, and I thought, okay, well, this looks quite interesting. It'll tide me over. Well, I applied, was interviews, got the job, and was there for 6 years. And so I had a ringside seat at the decline and fall of the London repertory cinema scene, which was just getting, because as video was taking over, and yeah, it was a very sad time, but it was great. Amazing. That was my film school. I have no film qualifications whatsoever, aside from spending 6 years running in, working for a guy called Peter Howden, who was a walking film encyclopedia, and was major player in London sort of repertory cinema things. And so I spent 6 years there, and then went back to university to finish a degree. And then my third attempt, I got into the BFI to develop, this is 2002, to develop content for a new web project called Screen Online, which was an encyclopedia of British film and television history, whose unique selling point was it was also going to include clips, and in some cases complete films. For copyright reasons, and we got a lot of complaints about that, but nothing we could do, the video was restricted to schools and universities and legitimate educational establishments, which included public libraries. So people can go into public libraries, but we couldn't beam them into the home. And this was before YouTube, it was before the BBC iPlayer, before lots of streaming services, so we were really ahead of the curve. I remember we got emails, some of the politer ones, saying, well, have you thought about making the whole of British film and television history available online free of charge worldwide? And
just a small ask.
Rights problem. I mean, the fact that the free of charge thing is actually quite important, because we weren't charging money, and because we were restricting to legitimate educational institutions, the people we had to deal with, which included rights holders, included Equity, the British equivalent of the Screen Actors Guild, it included Performing Rights Society, loads and loads of legal hoops we had to jump through, because the BFI has got to be absolutely above board when it comes to clearing rights and things. So that was great. I mean, I wrote, I just wrote tons of stuff every week, watched loads of films, watched films on a sort of Steenbeck, sort of 35, 16mm principle of Steenbeck, which is a really very uncomfortable way of watching films. But the fact that you're so close to the actual film print is just incredibly, there's really nothing to beat it. And also made lots of contacts. I got into producing DVDs quite by chance, which was not a career ambition of mine. I reviewed a lot of DVDs for DVD Times, which is now the Digital Fix. But what happened was everyone at the BFI was sent a standard email about what they'd recently cleared the rights to. And at one point my email pinged and it said, well, we've cleared a load of short films by Jan Schwankmeyer for DVD release. And I was a huge Schwankmeyer fan. And so I got in touch with Eric Sargent, who was the head of BFI Video Publishing, I think it was called then. And I actually knew him from way back, and said, well, look, Eric, I'm a bit of a Schwankmeyer expert, so if you need any help, let me know. And he summoned me down to his office and said, well, why don't you produce the project? And I said, I have never produced a DVD in my life. Are you mad? And he said, well, look what you do for a living now. You do multimedia content development. I swear to you, it is 90% the same job. And he was absolutely right. It really is. Possibly even more so now than it was then. So the Schwankmeyer project took a long time to get off the ground, because Eric decided partway through to try and make it, because originally it was just going to be 12 shorts, and partway through he said, oh, why don't we go for a complete one, all 26? And I thought, brilliant, but obviously massively increased the workload massively. We had to go back and renegotiate all the contracts, and it took a long time. And in the meantime, the Quay brothers were having their stuff restored, and they said, oh, well, he's been working the Schwankmeyer thing, so he's obviously this is his kind of thing. So they said, well, do you want to produce that? And I said, yeah, right. And so that leapfrogged the Schwankmeyer thing, and that came out first. And it was great. I was actually working with the Quays, who became good friends. Their producer, Keith Griffiths, who I knew anyway. And it was the first time I worked on a sort of DVD project with the actual filmmakers. And mostly a very positive experience. It got quite funny at times, because they would email as the twins. And sometimes I would get, this is before smartphones. So basically, if you email me between my leaving home and getting into the office, I wouldn't get it. So sometimes I'll get into the office and find an email set about 4:30 in the morning. There was just vitriolic denunciation of what we were working on. And then there will be a much more conciliatory email sent at about 7 saying, oh, second thoughts there, that's absolutely fine. Go ahead with it. I'm absolutely convinced that one brother won't run of the emails and the other brother won't the other of the emails. And I'm pretty sure which brother is which based on proximity of their homes to the studio. but it was good fun, actually. I very much enjoyed that. Then the Shrankmeyer thing came out, and that got rave reviews because we did actually manage to make it complete. Touch and go, actually. The thing that held it up was his only music video, it took ages to track down who owned it, because it was a very minor release by Hugh Cornwell called Another Kind of Love, which I can't remember how low it charted, but it really wasn't spectacular. So the catalogue just got passed from company to company to company, and then finally I can't remember who it ended up with, but we said, well, you got this thing, and they looked up and said, oh yeah, so we have, and asked for an absolutely eye-watering sum, as is often the case with music videos. So I went to the BFI's head of content, and he said, do we have to have this? Perfectly reasonable question. And I said, well, it is one of the official short films, so how much do you want to put complete on the box? And he said, bless him, I very much do want to put complete on the box.
You're always risking the people like us to come at you if they, because they're going to know.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, the US Shrankmeyer did come. I think they fell about 3 short of the Magic 26, and so we were determined to get it right. And it did need a decently hefty increase in budget, but he was prepared to make it. And I love it. I love it when you can go to people like that and get them to make decisions, because I've never been in a position of responsibility for green lighting stuff like that, and I know it's a commercial risk, and I love it. When they say yes, that's brilliant. When they say no, I say, well, that's fine. I totally understand it.
Yeah.
So yeah. So those.
Yeah, there's always I think even more now since boutique labels are it's booming right now, and I think there's even more obviously even more labels getting created. We'll talk about that later, but there's a competition between labels, I think, to make sure they're putting out the best, like the most complete version. Like the thing that comes to mind is the Vinegar Syndrome and Synapse release of Thriller, where Synapse put out that Thriller release that was not, restored completely, and it wasn't the complete version. And then Vinegar Syndrome was like, guys, wait on, because we got this one coming, and you're going to want that. So like there's I think like a friendly competition between some of these labels to do like the most complete and best version of something.
Yes, sometimes we will actively collaborate with other labels.
Yeah. I was going to say there's collaboration now.
Yeah. Arrow and Synapse.
Well, I would say Arrow and Eureka. I think, was it Eureka recently? Or
there's a couple movies.
Yes, sometimes Psychomania, the BFI put it out in the UK. Arrow put it out in the US. In some cases, you get the exact same disc. I know there've been some collaborations between Arrow and Flicker Alley, film noir titles. Actually, no, we in fact, a couple of mine, Borowczyk's Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Miss Osborne. If you stick it in a Region A player, you get the Arrow video branding and an appropriately lyrid animated menu. If you stick it in a Region B player, you get the much artier Arrow Academy treatment. It's exactly the same disc, which saves on manufacture, and that happens across labels as well. There's some film noir releases where you stick it in Region A, you get Flicker Alley branding. Stick it in Region B, you get Arrow branding, but it's exactly the same film. Exactly the same encode.
Yeah. This happened to me, and this was interesting because I didn't think this was the case. The Jodorowsky set that Arrow put out was similar to that, where it was supposed to not work in US Region A players, but I bought it and it does. And I heard from others, I bought it and it does. When here in the US, I think the company Abco put it out, and they're essentially the same set.
It probably is, yes.
And it just like, I don't know if there was special features differences somewhere along the line, but it's aesthetically the same set.
There are things like with when Arrow put out Jacques Rivette's 13-hour Out One, and Carlotta also put it out in France. I think in those cases they did their own menus and so on, because it's going to be region B both times, so you wouldn't be able to pull off that same trick. But you are watching absolutely the same encodes, the same files, same subtitles. Because there is no point reinventing the wheel, especially if you've got a 13-hour film.
Right. And so, I know, I think there wasn't there a Golden Harvest film that came out recently, Stephen? That
you talk about one arm boxer.
One Arm Boxer that Arrow put out a release, and then a couple of years ago, I think Eureka had put it out, and it's the only difference between the two. I think was just one special feature, but it had the same exact transfer and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, probably.
Arrow, I think, had gotten an exclusive special feature.
Sometimes in these cases, it's not just the same transfer; it's the exact same video file. There's no reason to change it. Then nothing. If it's not broken, then don't bother fixing it.
The only difference that seems to be is who seems to own the licenses in which country, whether it's US or UK, seems to be one of those dividing things.
And of course, it gets confusing if you have companies that operate in both territories.
Yeah, now everyone's kind of operating both. I mean, 88 Films has a US branch. Arrow came over here several years ago. I don't know if Eureka has started yet.
No, I don't.
Indicator's starting to do it now. Yeah.
Indicator did it very quickly. I think they did it.
Last year. Yeah, over this last year.
The first US titles came out at the beginning of this year, yes.
Yeah. Yes, and they're getting US only titles as well. Indicator.
Well, this ties in with what you were saying about because the first two US only titles, which are Requiem for a Village and Love on the Doll, are in fact BFI releases. And they so we couldn't get the Indicator couldn't get the UK rights because in fact the BFI actually owned those films outright. They even made Requiem for a Village in the first place, so they own those in perpetuity unless anyone wants to buy the entire thing lock, stock and barrel off them, which is highly unlikely ever to happen. So there was no chance of releasing them in the UK. But Sam Dunn, the Indicator who you've had on your podcast, he actually was responsible for the BFI release of Requiem for a Village, and he thought he very much welcomed the chance to revisit it. And so we've added more short films. We've added a sort of two-part commentary with director David Gladwell, who, in part one he talks about his career, and in part two, both times, because it's not a very long film, it's only just over an hour. Part one he talks about his career, part two he talks specifically about the film. So yes, it's a rare example, instance where you can actually go back and do a sort of version 2. Which is
time can always give you different perspectives on things if you've watched the film a few more times, and there's always something new to say about a movie. Some people don't think so, but I think I'm always learning something new about something I've watched many times.
You've just reminded me a good example, because Requiem for a Village came out originally in the UK in 2011. And then since then, there's been a huge amount of fairly heavyweight scholarship into folk horror, in which Requiem for a Village is a fairly crucial title. And so the booklet and the extras for the Indicator edition were able to draw on that scholarship in the way that obviously wouldn't have been possible in 2011. So it's really great to have the opportunity to do something like that.
Yeah. So going into, as we said, you're freelance, and now you're kind of, you kind of do a little bit of everything that is you're able to do. You've told us off mic that you do a lot of stuff with Indicator, but then whenever you get a chance, whenever you have the willpower, because you're working so hard on all that stuff, you do like to branch out to other labels. So tell us a little bit about what your day to day, what you're working on and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's the day to day is literally I switch on my computer, I have a look at what my current project is and what I'm expected to have done by the end of the day, and I usually get interrupted by something, so it doesn't quite pan out that way. But a lot of the time, I do a lot of subtitling, which I really like. Actually, you really get to know a film very well indeed if you have personally subtitled it, particularly if you personally subtitled it by ear, which thankfully doesn't happen very often.
Yeah,
but sometimes it has, and sometimes I mean, I left the BFI in 2011 because the then new David Cameron government were coming in, and I was absolutely certain, correctly as it turned out, that they would cut the BFI's grant, and I was equally certain, based on precedent, that because they'd been cutting their operations to the bone throughout the previous decade while I was there, because their grants had been frozen by the previous government, so which effectively meant it was going, it was diminishing year on year. And I thought, well, really, the only way they can survive a grant cut is by getting rid of people. So there will probably be a voluntary redundancy scheme, and sure enough, there was. And my wife was wanting to go back to work full time. And as she quite correctly pointed out, as a respected medical professional, she had far greater earning potential than me. So I couldn't really argue with that. And she said, well, will the BFI be happy about you working from home full time? And I said, probably not. But if you wait a few months, I'm very confident indeed they'll have a voluntary redundancy scheme. And that's exactly what happened. They went, it was quite horrible at first, because they called our department, I was in the curatorial team, into one of the screening rooms and said, right, okay, this is the situation. One of you is going to have to volunteer to go. Otherwise, we're going to have to pick one of you at random. And I had already decided I was going to volunteer to go, but I couldn't tell anyone until my application had been approved. So that which was about 2 weeks. And it was horrible, actually, because people were really, really worried, because these are, if you're a BFI curator, you have a great deal of incredibly specialist knowledge that isn't very easy to transfer elsewhere. You're the world's leading expert on government-backed public information films, or films of the National Coal Board Film Unit, or stuff like that, which is very useful that you have people like that, but it's not really the kind of thing that you're going to get. So it was once I was finally able to tell people, it was great. The attitude was I'd taken a bullet for the rest of the team, which isn't that correct, but it did mean that when I left, not only did I get a payout, but I also was able to. The BFI was probably my major source of income for a good 2 years after I left, because people were just being very generous and giving me first refusal on things, and then I was increasingly working for Arrow. On Arrow Academy, I wrote booklet essays. I wrote, the sort of blurbs on the back of. I think they reissued a whole load of things, and they actually had descriptive blurbs on the back this time. So I wrote those. Started doing QC inspections, and then in 2013 they asked, did I want to start producing things? So I said, yeah, right. And so
once again, that question came up to you. Do you want to produce this? Yeah.
Well, obviously I knew what was involved this time.
Yeah.
A little easier to decide.
I mean, I had only produced 2 things up to then, and I was really coasting on the back, because the Quay and Schwankmeyer sets did get an absolutely extraordinary critical reception, because of the contents rather than anything I did. But it was, it's a very useful thing to have on my resume. And then, I started producing stuff mostly for Arrow Academy, occasionally for Arrow Video. I would, and they were probably my major employers from about 2013 to 2017. But I'd also do freelance gigs for other labels, Eureka in particular. And what happened there was I would, because this probably won't be a surprise to you, but the Arrow Academy titles tended to have lower production budgets than the Arrow Video titles. And so I would try and stretch them as far as they would possibly go, which in a lot of cases meant presenting stuff myself. I did my first audio commentary under those circumstances, because I spent so much on getting some translation work done that I didn't have enough to pay a bona fide expert. And I did actually know a lot about that particular film, so I did it myself. And by early 2017, I was just totally exhausted. I think I worked on Decalogue and Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia back to back. That's the one with the disc with more than 10 hours of interviews, which is not, I do bridle when I see this, it's not raw footage. They have been just as tightly edited as anything else. It's just virtually all the original interviews have been preserved. We cut out all the technical stuff, but that was just a colossal amount of work. And by 2017, I was absolutely burned out, and I said, I want to go back to writing. So I left Arrow, and I was talking to Nick Wrigley, who's one of my oldest friends in this business. He's the guy who actually founded, in fact, he'd be a great guest for you. He actually founded Masters of Cinema, and was probably
somebody else. I think John and Sam did bring him up on the.
Well, he's a very much respected indicator colleague now. But anyway, I was talking to him, and I was talking about, because he left Eureka a few years earlier, again after suffering total burnout. And I said, well, what happened? And we sort of compared our situations, and he said, so does this mean you're potentially available? And I said, very cautiously, yes. The next thing I knew, it's about 10 minutes later, I got a phone call, and from my old BFI colleague, Sam Dunn. And because he's an old colleague of mine, his name was in the phone, so I knew it was Sam before answering. And I thought, well, this is very nice. I haven't spoken to him for some time. And it turned out that he was the co-founder of Indicator, and he made me an offer that only an idiot would have refused, and I didn't. Which is great, because what it was a much more circumscribed production job than I'd had before. I wasn't involved in any way with licensing or the artwork or the packaging or the booklet. I was purely involved with putting together the actual disc contents together, which is very much my favorite area anyway. And it's been like that ever since, and it's been brilliant. It's it's a fabulous team. It's I think you can tell how good a team is and how well they're working together by the fact that the last person to leave the Indicator team left pretty much exactly 5 years ago.
Right near the beginning.
Right near the beginning. I think, and I can guess, I didn't talk to him about this, but I can guess, I suspect the workload was just insane. But since then, we've added people. Anthony Neal came in as head producer, who's, again, old Arrow colleague of mine, and I knew him going back early 2000s. James Blackford, who's also an Arrow and BFI colleague of mine, he then came in as a producer. Most recently, we've had Nora Maheny, who's again, old Arrow and Facilities House colleague of mine. And every time someone like that, who I already know and work with, joins the team, it's brilliant because they just fit in absolutely seamlessly. We're all perfectionists. I'm sure we all drive each other up the wall on a regular basis. I remember a really plaintive email a few weeks ago. There was a proper cry for help saying, look, we are desperately up against this manufacturing deadline. Does it really matter if we can hear a really faint thump in the background of a soundtrack? But because we all do totally respect each other's skills. We know what we can do. We know what we can't do. So we're very good at sort of passing things on to other things. We know, I mean, for example, when subtitling, I subtitled everything from the Sinbad box set up to, can't remember, one of the Colombian Noir Volume 4, I think. And then it just got, the workload was just so enormous that we started, I would reluctantly agree to relinquish subtitling to a professional subtitling company. So they did Colombian 4 and a few other things. But it's, and then Michael J. Murphy, which is just it's all going to be done by ear, and it's just it is no one person could possibly do all that.
Yeah.
But that, again, it just works really, really nicely. I think because we're all completely focused on doing the best possible job that we can. And Sam's great because I have never. I mean, normally I don't get on very well with really micromanaging bosses. I'm much more, I much prefer people to just pick the best person for the job and then tell them what they're expecting them to do a month later, and then just leave them to get on with it. And I've been lucky in that is, for the most part, that's the experience I've had. Sam, is just forensic attention to detail, but somehow manages to do it in such a way that he doesn't actually tread on anyone's toes. And it is actually very reassuring that the person who is, ultimately responsible for paying for all this is paying such close attention to what we're doing. Mm-hmm. It gives you a real feeling of confidence, and it's great that you can just pick up the phone and call the person in charge and get an instant verdict. And it just works really, really, really well.
Well, it seems like the way you're describing the team over there and how Sam's so closely involved, it shows in the work, and it shows because there's a consistency to what you guys put out. It's so great. Shows
the product definitely benefits from that. From the collective passion, I say, of everyone working there, from the top down, it's relevant. It's very evident.
And it is genuine passion. I mean, a lot of us have sort of have sidelines as sort of critics and reviewers and sort of historians and so on. I mean, we really do try to really get to know this stuff in detail. So not least so we can talk about it intelligently. If people say, "Oh, well, it says," actually, I was saying earlier off mic when. Sometimes because we were talking about how difficult it is getting the aspect ratio right, getting the running time right is another one. Because sometimes what the IMDb and Wikipedia say doesn't match what the length of the master we're given. And sometimes this is because there is a problem with the master, which we then have to investigate. Sometimes it's because in the case of the Pumpkin Eater, I think the IMDb said it was just under 2 hours. And the master I had was about 10 minutes shorter. And so I thought, okay, this is going to be a problem if people ask questions about it. So I did a bit of digging and discovered that the IMDb running time is the running time of the world premiere at the Cannes Film Festival, after which director Jack Clayton and editor Jim Clark decided that parts of it weren't playing the way they wanted, and so they cut about 10 minutes out of it. And ever since then, every single commercial release of that film has been that shorter version, which is the version on the master. So that's fine. I'm happy with that. And that's if people ask about it, then I can give them an instant, factual, evidence-backed answer. In fact, the editor Jim Clark's memoirs were very useful there, so I could quote him. But quite often you do have to do quite a bit of digging just to make sure that I want to be satisfied in my own mind that we're right.
Yeah, when we've talked to other people from behind the scenes like this, it always ends up sounding like detective work. There's so much detective work going on.
So much detective work.
Yeah.
Specifically when you're dealing with films, like an international film, you know what I mean? Because I think you mentioned that, the cut we'll have here in the US will be different than the cut you'll have in the UK because the censors are different.
Yes. That is with the Hammer boxes. Invariably, I can't think of an exception, Sony sends us the US cut, which is sometimes fine. Most of the time it's fine. But sometimes there are a few slight differences. The title may change. Like the film I know as Fanatic is known as Die, Die, My Darling in the US. The film I know as The Full Treatment is Stop Me Before I Kill. They obviously decided Fanatic and The Full Treatment wasn't exciting enough. So in cases like that, we try to get hold of the BFI National Archive has been very helpful here. And this is where having personal contacts there is also very useful. So in the case of, actually the Full Treatment is quite an interesting one because the BBFC database says it was a full 2 hours long, which did not tally with either Sony's master or the release print of a British version we found. And I actually think it's a typo. The BBFC database is really rock solid reliable for stuff entered after they went electronic, but before that I think there is quite a little data entry temps getting it wrong. So we found a lot of evidence that it was actually only 109 minutes, and then the Sony master turned up and it's only 107 minutes. So we thought, okay, that's interesting. And so we got a scan of the British release version and the Sony master, and around them side by side, and there was one scene, and as soon as it started, I knew exactly why it had been cut out of the US scene, the US version, because it's basically Diane Cilento visibly topless in the bath in a film from 1960, and in Britain that was no big deal. In the US, it was absolutely unreleasable. So they cut that entire 2-minute scene out, unfortunately, because it's actually psychologically quite crucial. It's a scene where the protagonist, the first time he reveals he's got this sort of these murderous impulses even towards his wife. But yeah, so with that, we, as luck would have it, because we had a copy of the uncut version, we were able to put that scene back in and sort of match the grading. And we were also able to reconstruct the original UK titles from that. So an even more enjoyable case for me was The Stranglers of Bombay, because that had been cut. Again, we had the US version from Sony, we had the UK version from the BBFC. There was a bit of a fingers crossed moment when we sent it to the BBFC because of the famous scene where a mongoose fights a snake, clearly for real. And we have very, very strict animal cruelty laws, and it's not sort of censorship policies, it is actual laws that you cannot, I think the rule is you cannot distribute a film in which animal cruelty was deliberately carried out as a byproduct of the filming process. So the loopholes are, if it would have happened anyway, which is what I call the David Attenborough defense, and if it's clearly faked and the filmmakers can prove it. But if they can't, and if it's clearly real, then and the thing about The Stranglers of Bombay is that that scene had been cut out of a video release in the mid-90s, and so we thought, okay, that's going to be a headache. But when we got hold of the master, we saw that, because it's high definition, which it wouldn't have been in the mid-90s, we saw that there was a really obvious difference in visual texture between the bulk of the film and those shots. They were clearly shot by a different cameraman in a completely different place. And then we found an interview with the camera operator, who I think he was asked about that scene, and he said, I had nothing to do with that. It was brought in from an Indian documentary maker. So we sent all that to the BBFC, and they said, absolutely fine. So in it went. But that's a digression. We obviously, it was great getting the go-ahead for that. But then we had two different versions of the film. The American version had been cut for sex. Well, when I say sex, I mean Mary Devereaux with incredibly demonstrative cleavage, seemingly getting erotically excited at every single act of violence performed by this cult. I think there were about 5 shots of that, all of which went out of the US version. And in the UK version, graphic violence was cut, so you couldn't really see what she was getting erotically excited by. So we, but in this particular case, it was a pretty safe bet that the hybrid cut that I put together, which is basically all the footage from both versions, was what Terence Fisher originally intended to release. So we that disc actually has 3 different versions of the film. There's a US cut, there's a UK cut, and my hybrid cut, which has everything. I think the one executive decision I had to make was where to put the prologue, because it's in a slightly different place in each cut, and I decided the British one was probably closer to Terence Fisher's intentions. So I have no scientific basis for that at all, but it had to go somewhere. So that's in fact, multiple versions can be the bane of my life at times. Cause,
there's when we've talked to so many behind the scenes people, it seems, just sitting at the computer editing my shit, some of the stuff I've filmed before, you have to get motivation for it. And I can't even imagine the motivation you have to do some of the stuff that you guys have to do for these releases.
I mean, we are extraordinarily lucky in that David Mackenzie is our disc author and always has been. And I am unbelievably lucky. And I would say at least 90% of the projects I've worked on have had him as the disc author.
We had his brother on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
we had Michael Mackenzie on.
Because he is no exaggeration at all, and not remotely a minority opinion, the best in the business. Not just because of the quality of his work, but for his willingness to experiment. Because there are, plenty of experiments we tried that basically didn't work. But he's very happy to. Oh, he may be cursing my name as soon as we get off the thing. But we have done loads of things that in theory you're not supposed to do in terms of the Blu-ray spec. We got away with. And things like multiple versions is. I mean, what we try to avoid doing is have a situation where we have to encode full-length versions of more than one cut, because it just uses up disk space, and so you have trade-offs with things like compression. So if we can seamlessly branch it, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
But whether or not, the problem with seamless branching is it depends how many segments you have to cut the film up into. If it's a lot, I mean, Stranglers of Bombay was very straightforward, but if it's really complicated, and I think something like The Devil's Men earlier this year was towards the outer limits of the complicated. I think there were something like 35 different segments, all of which, it's a QC nightmare, because it has to, I mean, I have to QC it personally because I'm the only one who really knows how they're supposed to play. With that one, because we had the British, well, so-called X certificate version, which is actually, I think it will get a 15 now. In fact, I think it did get a 15. And then in the US, they cut out all the gore and nudity and released it as a children's film called Land of the Minotaur, and we included both versions.
Wow.
It was quite. I mean, when I say cut out, I mean that's literally what they did. There's no unique. So we had to recreate the title sequence digitally, but apart from that, it was. It was just a case of just making snips here and there, but then you also get subtitles have to be segmented as well. Sometimes soundtracks have to be. We had Age of Consent was just hair-raisingly difficult because there was something like 5 soundtracks on that film, and we could only play soundtrack A with version A and only soundtrack B with version B. We couldn't, that's why you can't change soundtracks.
Couldn't interchange them. Yeah.
It would just be a total mess. And in fact, whether or not we were able to include Michael Powell's last film, The Boy Who Turned Yellow, depended entirely on whether or not we could seamlessly branch the main feature, because otherwise we wouldn't have enough space. So we didn't announce that until very late because we weren't certain whether we could do it. And actually, that one, I was saying when we were off mic earlier, we actually got a complaint about that from the film's editor. Not because we'd messed it up, we hadn't. But he was very unhappy because the thing about that film is that there's the original Australian cut, and then there's the Columbia studio cut, which is significantly shorter and has a completely different music score. And we included both versions, and the editor was very unhappy about this because he thought the Columbia studio version should be buried and forgotten. And I totally understand where he was coming from, because it can't have been a nice experience having your masterpiece sort of cut about with. But our argument was, and is, that unless you're in Australia, between 1969 and 2005, all criticism of that film would have been based on the Columbia Studio version. And we thought it was very important to give people the chance to see what people would have seen, what people would have been writing about. It's a proper scholarly edition like that. And yeah, obviously the Australian cut's better. We make it very clear in the menu. It's the default playback option. But I did think it was important to include that version, however hellish it was. Seamless.
Yeah, we're always about including all versions if possible.
I was going to say, when it comes to like different edits or different cuts of different films, I think best is if you can make them all available. I think that's the best option for everyone involved, specifically the consumer. I guess we're consumer biased here, but it seems like that would be the preferred case. I know there's been many arguments or discussions over many years about definitive versions of films. We've had major directors go back and recut major versions of their work. We've had Oliver Stone's done it so many times. Ridley Scott's notorious for doing it, and then we'll get like titles like final cut or director's cut or something like that, and then they'll end up going back and doing it again. So it doesn't. It's kind of irrelevant. But I don't know. I think of Blade Runner, the final cut, when it comes to my head. But it seems like But the thing with something like Blade Runner is, if you want to, you can own 5 versions of that movie on Blu-ray because they do exist. If you even want the work per version, which is the unfinished version, you can watch that too.
Absolutely. Sometimes with older films, though, it is very hard to get hold of original cuts. I mean, one of the most challenging projects I worked on in this respect was Joseph Losey's Eve, which I can see, it's really sad now. I can still remember the running times of this. The very first cut that he showed to his producers ran 155 minutes. And he said at the time that was never intended to be the definitive version. But they said it's far too long. And so he cut it to 135 minutes, and they still said it's far too long. And by that stage, I think he'd used up his contractual rights. And so they took the film away from him, cut it down to 118 minutes, I think. And then finally it got released at 109 or thereabouts under the new title Ava. And then it was released possibly in the US, can't remember. It was called something like The Devil's Woman in a slightly modified version. And the problem with restoring that film is that neither of the 2 original Losey cuts survived. They were physically taken apart. And the footage presumed destroyed. But a copy of the second of his cuts, the 135-minute version one, was sold to a Scandinavian, I think, Finnish distributor. And Losey found out about it and belatedly managed to get hold of a print. And it turned out that also had some footage missing, but it also had some stuff that you couldn't be seen anywhere else. And so they were able to restore it to a certain extent. I think it is probably still missing about 6 or 7 minutes. And so we included both the commercially released versions and the restored version, and another version that we did because we thought, having inspected the release versions in such detail, we thought that there was a scene towards the end of one of them that actually really did belong in a longer cut. So the menu officer chose to play the official restoration and our version with an extra scene. So 4 versions, I think. Hideous language complications, because Ava was in English pretty much. The Devil's Woman was in a mixture of English and Italian. Ava was in English with a bit of Italian, but I think it was the kind of thing where they didn't intend to use a subtitle. It was perfect, even if you don't speak Italian, it was perfectly clear from the context what it was. And then the restoration there were fair chunks of it in Italian, so we had to subtitle those. And then a technical challenge was because of some of the 2 unique scenes only survive with Finnish and Swedish subtitles burned into the print. We tried to digitally remove them, but absolutely no chance. And so I had to position the English hard of hearing. No, actually, the English translation subtitles. It was, if you watch it, you'll see that they sort of jump all over the place, because I was thinking, I'm trying not to cover people's faces. So sometimes it will be at the top of the screen, sometimes it will be just above the Swedish subtitle.
I didn't even think about subtitle placement and how important it actually is.
It's not something I have to worry about a lot of the time, but when I do have to worry about it, I really have to worry about it.
I'll say that as someone who watches a lot of international cinema in general, I think a lot of our listeners do as well. Black and white films with white subtitles, very difficult to watch.
Well, it depends. I mean, it's absolutely black and white, 35mm or even worse, 16mm prints with white subtitles. Hideous. I mean, I've seen things like there's a Satyajit Ray film called Company Limited, where there's a really crucial final scene, which is an argument conducted by 4 men wearing white shirts. And it is literally impossible to read the subtitles. But I mean, electronic subtitles have drop shadows, so there shouldn't be an issue. And sometimes if we think there is going to be an issue, we'll put a very faint outline around it just to make sure that it's
well, that definitely helps, because I know there's a lot of probably older DVDs that did not do any of that, and you're kind of lost in conversations of you can't make out the words. You just can't. I mean,
yellow subtitles is not.
I was going to say yellow
British thing at all. We just don't do it. Subtitles have always been white.
I think that's more of a US thing.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's an NTSC broadcast thing, and it sort of carried over.
And yellow subtitles are kind of hideous. I understand why you need to do them, but
I mean, I totally
not good.
Readability is amazing. I mean, timing is. It's only when you start doing them yourself that you realize what a skilled job it actually is. Because my subtitling software color codes the subtitles accordingly. Basically, if it's black, it's fine. It's absolutely guaranteed to be fine. If it's blue, it's probably okay. If it's purple, you might be challenging people's speed reading abilities. And if it's orange, it says just don't do it. I have let a few orange ones through. Because I'm told I've been asked to try and keep as close to what's actually being said as is possible. Not always possible if everyone's talking at the same time. Robert Altman's Buffalo Bill and the Indians was an interesting challenge. Although one thing it really taught me is how incredibly precise Robert Altman's sound mixes are. I mean, you'll have a scene where people are talking. About half a dozen people are talking at the same time, but it's always absolutely clear which one you should be listening to. I think he was very precise about that, and I had to try and respect that same kind of precision in the subtitles, which was quite a challenge, especially because with that film, the official subtitles, which I think were produced as a translation aid rather than a transcription, so they massively sanitized the sort of 19th century vernacular, which of course I put back in. But if you do that, you do create a reading challenge as well. I did the same thing with Mad Dog Morgan. Even the Australian disc had modern English subtitles, and ours are much more 19th century Australian. But I do very strongly feel that if you can hear it, you should be able to read it.
Yeah.
Actually, to an extreme extent, one of my bugbears is when it says speaking foreign language. At the very least, I try to identify what that foreign language is. And if I can, I will try and transcribe it so they can actually read what is being said. And that dates back to Harryhausen's 20 Million Miles to Earth, which is set in Italy, and there's a fair amount of Italian dialogue, none of which you actually need to be able to understand. But I remember there's a bit where the emir is going berserk and trashing this laboratory, and there's this close-up of this Italian scientist, and the original subtitle said, sort of yelling in foreign language or something, and what he's actually going is misericordia, and I thought that's brilliant. We've got to have that in the subtitle. So I put that in, and then I thought, well, why not just have all the rest of the Italian dialogue subtitled like that? And so we did. And in general, if it's a Western Europe, if it's a Roman alphabet, we generally, not always, but generally try and feature the original language. Of course, that massively increases the workload. And sometimes
when you're a perfectionist, that's where your mind's going to go.
I do wonder what the hell I'm doing. And sometimes, I mean, there was a bit where in The Long Grey Line, where an Irish prayer is being uttered, and we actually tracked down a friend of a friend was a native Irish speaker, and he transcribed it for us. And it looks convincing enough.
Yeah. That is an attention to detail.
Yeah. All right. So I know we could go on forever, going deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole, but we do have a lot of Blu-ray announcements to cover this week. So let's go ahead and jump on over to our slates for the week. We're going to skip some, like I know Warner Archive had some stuff released and Kino, but we're going to save that for next week. And we're going to hit all the major big announcements this week. So Andrew, where should we start?
Well, first up, let's start with a little bit of news, because we have touched on this company a few times. Radiance Films, the company that has just recently launched, is in the process of launching, if you will, has recently struck a deal with MVD. MVD we've talked about here a few times, and they struck a deal with MVD Entertainment Group for North American and I think for North American distribution as well as the UK and Ireland. I believe this is a part of a kind of a distribution deal or production deal, something like that. But and Radiance is also kind of giving us a little look into what type of films they're going to be releasing. And a lot of it is going to be kind of probably deeper catalog titles. So from what I understand, there will probably be only Blu-ray releases, because a lot of these films probably haven't either seen the light of day, or films that are just deep catalog titles from the more obscure area of films. I can never pronounce his name. Simeone, who was, of course, the director of content at Arrow for, I think, a long time. I want to say a decade or so, maybe longer.
2010 to 22, yeah.
Yes, so 12 years, a dozen years. He's recently kind of launched this company, and this company, Radiance Films, is in the process of getting off of the ground. And I know he just tweeted out recently that he's picked his launch titles for Spine Number 1 already. So we're going to get Spine numbers. And he says that it's probably going to launch sometime soon. So I'm excited, Steven. I know we've been talking about it for a couple of months now.
Yeah. I reached out to him, and right as soon as he announced that he was doing this, I was like, okay, dude, you got to come on the podcast. And I already been talking to him about coming on the podcast before he announced his exit from Arrow. So him coming on got pushed because of this new venture. So he's in the thick of that. And so hopefully somewhere probably after the launch of his first titles, we'll be able to have Fran on and discuss the new label.
Yeah, it sounds like they've got a lot in the works. He says here on his Twitter that he's got 4 box sets planned, but so there's going to be box sets, there's going to be individual releases, there's going to be a lot of stuff coming from this company sometime soon.
Him working for the director of content, he knows what people want,
the ins and outs.
The Arrow is very good at knowing what the consumer wants. He knows about working about the box sets, and he knows that kind of world. So
the level of detail and quality that Arrow's been delivering for
also
many years.
Crucially, he knows what sells and what doesn't.
Yeah. And I was going to say, you've probably worked with him, I'm sure.
I know him very well. I mean, I was very heavily involved with Arrow Academy, where he started in 2011 as a sort of spin-off from Arrow, the sort of art house version of Arrow Video. I was the co-producer of the Valerian Borovchik box, which was the thing that sort of broke them through to being considered as serious players in sort of restoration. That was the one that was part crowdfunded because the budget went so high. But we were Daniel Bird and I were specifically charged with producing something award-winning. So we said you're going to have to put resources behind it, and bless them, they did. It was wonderful. We know each other extremely well. I actually bumped into him, and we were both at the Cinema Ritrovato Festival in Bologna earlier this month. I mean, I think it's brilliant. I mean, I don't know precisely. I have no idea what's going to be in these box sets. I only know of one title that's definitely happening, which I probably can't say now, but it is seriously obscure. Really, it sounds really, but it is seriously obscure. And that may well be. I don't know whether that's going to be in any way representative of what he's doing. But there is very much, branding is really important. When labels. It's like a label I do a lot of work for, and it's run by a really dear friend of mine, Millie Modi's Second Run, who their entire ethos is based on picking up films that either didn't get released in Britain at all, or which didn't really get their the treatment they deserved, and just giving them a second chance. And it wasn't supposed to become a specialist Eastern European label, but those were the most popular titles, and that's how. But every single film released by Second Run is the personal choice of Millie Modi, and so you're buying into his taste, and so if you are in sync with his taste, then the chances are you will like it. And I think they have a very, very loyal fan base, because a business like that is massively reliant on people's willingness to blind buy stuff, because these films, for the most part, are basically unknown. I mean, even something, a film that is now in the top 150 of Sight and Sound's greatest films ever made, Marketa Lazarova, amazing Czech epic, totally unknown in the English-speaking world until Second Run. Criterion have since done it. Yeah, about 6 years after, 6 years after the second run. So something like that is a really hard sell, and that's one of the reasons they tried to keep the price down. As they didn't get into Blu-ray for many years. I think it was only about 2016 because they couldn't work out how to get it cheaply enough for people to be prepared to take a chance on them. They do. Melly is a former music industry accountant, and I know from extensive experience of working with him, he watches every penny because he has to. They're very, very, budgeting is incredibly tight because it's with a label as niche as that, it's the difference between staying in or going out of business. And I'm delighted that they're still around and not far short of their 20th anniversary, which is in a few years. So Radiance Films, I think it's very interesting seeing how active they are on social media, and they're very much trying to sort of build up a sort of strong brand identity, even without revealing any actual titles. And it's very interesting seeing how he's going about it. And he's got a lot of goodwill because, of course, Fran basically was Arrow Academy throughout its existence. It was his brainchild. He was the person who took the decision to release a Valerian Borovchik box of restorations. He took the decision to release Jack Rivette's sort of 13-hour Out One. I mean, just the Buddhist trilogy. I mean, really, really risky titles. So I think he's got a lot of goodwill because of that reputation, and it'll be very, very interesting to see how that pans out.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, we've been in contact too, and definitely can't wait to hear more about what the direction is.
He's got some very good people working with. I mean, I know pretty much everyone I have worked with everyone he's approached at some point or other, and they're terrific.
We've heard a couple announcements, of course, with Alexander Heller Nicholas coming in, and
Kat Ellinger as well.
Kat Ellinger, and
Tom Mess, Johnny May, someone else who can't remember off the top of my head, but these are really, really good people.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, Andrew. So, what first slate should we go to?
Yeah, let's stay in the UK. Let's go with Eureka.
All right.
Yeah, Eureka announced their October 2022 lineup, and it is 4 releases. They're releasing the silent era film Hunchback of Notre Dame, with starring Lon Chaney from 1923. They're releasing another Boris Karloff box set called Maniacal Mayhem, which has The Invisible Ray, Black Friday, and The Strange Door. So that's 3 films in that set. They're releasing a Blu-ray of The Most Dangerous Game from 1932, which is starring Joel McCrea and Fay Wray. I really like this film a lot, actually. This is kind of a release I really, really want. This is also done by, I believe, the same directors who directed King Kong. Which I think came out a year after this, coincidentally.
Yes, that's right. Ernest Beach showed second, Nancy Cooper. Yep.
Yes, and they're releasing a standard edition of Vampire, the Carl Theodor Dreyer film, I believe from 1932. Or was it 34? I think it's
32.
32. That's the 4 releases from this slate here. What's interesting to me is that specifically I know the Boris Karloff films, 2 out of the 3 of the films in this set, I think, are part of the Shout Factory Universal horror line of box sets that they put out. I think it's in that first box set, actually, that I have, which has 4 films in it, similar to the other Boris Karloff set that they announced more recently as well. But The Most Dangerous Game is the one that's really on my map. Because it has a Blu-ray release here in the States, but it's part of I think a double feature disc put out, I think, a decade ago or so. And so it's not a long film. So for it to get its own release, hopefully they're padding it with some extra features. I'd have to do some research on that. But yeah, Flickr Alley put out a Blu-ray in 2012 of The Most Dangerous Game and Gal the Headhunter. And yeah, it's still in print here, but this is obviously something I'm more interested in. Steven, anything interest you here?
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Most Dangerous Game, very influential, film and story, and it's been kind of reused a bunch of times. Looking at the features here too, I mean, there's
2K
a couple
restoration.
Yeah, a couple good interviews, and we got Kim Newman's doing a commentary, and then I see Stephen Thrower is doing an interview in there, which is he's always good. So yeah, I mean, and then I love Hunchback of Notre Dame. I love that story as well. And I don't know that I haven't seen this version.
Well, there's this version, and I think the version I think most people are more aware of is the 1939 film starring Charles Lawton. I think that's the one that comes sometime after this. This story's been adapted so many times. So many times.
And so Michael, anything excites you here?
Well, I mean, yes. I mean, I missed out on the limited edition of Vampire, so I will definitely be getting the standard edition because that is an absolutely astonishing film. I mean, but you know, of the others, I think the Most Dangerous Game is the one that's most immediately appealing. As you said, it hasn't been released on Blu-ray in the UK before, so I should say I don't import very much these days because well, put it like this: during the golden age of DVD, around about the sort of mid-2000s, the pound to dollar exchange rate was something like $2 to a pound. It's now nearer $1.20 to the pound. Yes. So things have just got eye-wateringly expensive. So what I tend to do now is I import things that I really, really, really want, like the the sort of Severin Woodland's Dark and Days Bewitched box and stuff like that. But one-off single disc things generally not. So, and I suspect I'm very far from alone because the US import will cost a lot more than.
Oh yeah, I mean, I do still, for the most part, unless there is a Indicator puts out a US version, I'm still directly ordering from Indicator, though the shipping costs are up there. But I like that guarantee, and also usually it comes a little faster. So.
Yeah,
so I like that. I like the speediness.
The getting stuff from Indicator, although expensive, does come quick for me. I don't know, maybe it's because I'm on the East Coast.
They usually send it out a little earlier too, right?
Yes, the policy is to send it as soon as they hit the warehouse, and so sometimes that can be. I think in one case, we were about a fortnight ahead of the official release.
Yeah.
So yeah, and
I've gotten stuff like a couple days early before the street date and stuff like that. So even having to go overseas, And
then sometimes we delay things by a week for various manufacturing reasons, and they actually turn up on the same day anyway.
It's about. Actually, I was just on Indicator last night. It's still, I think, to the US about £13, and that's like standard shipping. Yeah. Which I think is, what is that, Steve? That's about $18
roughly,
our time, about $20 our time. Our money, so it's a bit expensive. It's not as Australia is probably the most expensive, I would say.
Oh yeah, I mean, I did something for imprints recently for their Desert Zala disc, and they asked me have I seen any imprint discs, and I had to admit I hadn't because they're just so expensive.
Yeah.
Obviously, I was aware of their reputation, but I just simply hadn't seen anything they've done.
It's very expensive. To get stuff here, let alone in the UK, which is further geographically than the US is.
Yeah, we typically wait on. There's some of in the sponsor of our show, Orbit DVD. It gets a lot of that stuff in, so they of course they have to adjust for their costs as well for shipping, but they're getting in these large quantities. If we're just wanting one or two titles, from an imprint, it's way better than trying to get it from them directly at this point. So
yeah, very much so. Even they also. Orbit DVD, not to plug them too much. They also
we should plug them as much as possible.
I guess we should plug them as much, but they do have Eureka titles. That's actually where I've been buying a lot of Eureka titles, has been from them, because they typically get a lot of Eureka titles in 88 Films and Arrow stuff. Basically, all the stuff from like UK and Australia kind of comes there, and I just wait.
Yeah, you just gotta be patient.
Even Indicator as well, and I just kind of wait because the Eureka stuff is more interesting because Eureka is region B locked, so a lot of that stuff you can't really get in a lot of US places.
It's I mean, actually, I think every single British label that I'm aware of has exactly the same region locking policy, which is not to region lock unless they're forced to. But it is virtually impossible to license something from a major these days and not
without doing it.
Sony, well, they used to be the exception, and then the theory is that Indicator's Night of the Demon was so successful that they thought, oh, hang on a minute. Because around at some point in 2019 they started insisting that things be region locked, and that remains the same going forward.
And a lot of the thing also, I mean, we're relatively early on in the UHD 4K game. By early on, I mean like a couple of years, which I guess is early when it comes to home entertainment. But UHD is not region locked right now. At one point it could happen, but
I think one release got region locked by mistake. mistake, but I can't remember what it was. But yeah, it's not part of the UHD spec. So in theory, I mean, Indicator is going into UHD very soon, and I'm anticipating things won't be region locked, but we'll see.
We'll see. So, all right. So next,
so where do you want to go from there, Steven?
Let's jump into Criterion.
Okay. Yes, as we predicted, Criterion did announce their slate this week, their October slate, and I think they did this on Monday.
Yes.
So this is quite a few days ago, and it is a slate of stuff that people are buzzing about severely. A couple of upgrades and a couple of things that people have been waiting for. But just to get into it, we have Night of the Living Dead is getting a 4K UHD release upgrade. Speaking of upgrades, and we heard about this now for months and months. Lost Highway, the David Lynch film from 1997, is getting a Blu-ray and 4K UHD release from Criterion. This one will be coming with special features and stuff like that. Notoriously, the Kino release from a few years ago did not, for several reasons that a lot of people have discussed over time. But next up is a personal victory for me. They heard me yelling into the void. Arsenic and Old Lace, the film starring Cary Grant and Priscilla Lane, is finally getting a Blu-ray release. The Frank Capra film from 1944, the dark screwball comedy. Absolutely love it. I can finally upgrade my DVD. Next is a modern film that came out in 2019, I believe, is La Llorona. This film is actually a Shudder original film, I believe. The Shudder, which is the horror streaming service, this is their film, I believe, because that's where I watched it, actually, and that's where you can currently see it. Next up is The Cure, the film by Kiyoshi Kurosawa from 1997. Very interesting film. Steven, I don't know, did you get to see this?
Which one? I'm sorry.
Cure.
I've seen it a while back ago.
Okay, I remember you had seen it years ago.
Yeah. I've definitely I've seen it. It's just been a minute.
Yeah, because I was gonna mention the type of vibe it gave me. It feels like a David Fincher film.
Yeah.
That's the vibe I got. But
with even more extreme violence.
Yes, but it takes a more interesting twist. But it feels like that investigative vibe, that darker vibe to it. But lastly, speaking of kind of darker vibes, literally, because it's dealing with kind of voodoo and horror and things like that, is a film that I think people have been clamoring for a Blu-ray release for years, is Casey Lemon's film Eve's Bayou. This is a film that's been only available on DVD for many, many years, and it's finally getting a Blu-ray release. So that was a big to do with a lot of people this week. But Steven, this is a great slate, a really solid slate. A nice mix. Yeah, a nice mix of some upgrades, some things
first times, classic films. I would say it's obvious to say Lost Highways is the exciting one. The one that I think that I actually am very mostly excited to get is Eve's Bayou after watching it for the first time the other day. It really is a good film, and it's interesting. We see Sam Jackson in so many different types of roles, but he's typically playing some kind of like over the top type of character. To see him in this film playing kind of a more subtle father figure character that's actually not likable really is interesting. Or this was earlier on in his career when he hadn't been kind of cornered into this. This is very much this is post Pulp Fiction, pre Star Wars, if you want to put a time frame on that. But I know Casey Lemons hasn't directed many films. She's more known as an actress. So this is actually her first film. And she directed, I think most recently, the Harriet Tubman film Harriet from 2019. I know that was her most recent film, but she is most known as an actress. She was in The Silence of the Lambs. She was Clarice Starling's friend in Silence of the Lambs. And she was also in Candyman as well. But Eve's Bayou is a big one, I think,
for me, going right along with Love and Basketball, which came out recently. I think we're seeing what we're seeing kind of really great, Black cinema representation now in the Criterion collection.
They really have been pushing the boat out on that. I think appointing Ashley Clark as their sort of advisor has made a really visible difference there.
So what stands out to you? Which one excites you? I mean, is it Lost Highway or?
I think I would have to say Lost Highway, simply because I saw that when it came out on 2 consecutive days. Actually, I was so impressed I went back the second day, and in 35mm, I mean, it really pushes the resolution of 35mm to the absolute limit. There is stuff there that is so dark that you can barely make it out, quite deliberately. And I have not seen a single video version since then that does anywhere close to justice to what I remember from that. Obviously 4K HDR is, they have the right tools at their disposal, presumably David Lynch's personal involvement. So it's going to be really interesting to see if they can recapture that, because I have never ever forgotten. It's the first half an hour when it's really quite petrifying. So from a purely technical perspective, I'm really looking forward to that. Eve's Bio I saw back in the VHS era, but remember it being really, really good. It's really. In fact, Arsenic and Old Lace was one of the first things I bought for my then future wife, who's a massive Cary Grant fan. So I still have that. In fact, probably that very same DVD, because I have.
I've watched it many times. I'm a massive Cary Grant fan. Well, actually, one of my kind of collecting missions is to own every Cary Grant film. Getting this finally in a much better quality version is just kind of, like I said, like a personal victory for me.
You actually just reminded me. I mean, we probably shouldn't be talking about cinema experiences, given that this is all about home video, but.
We're champions of the cinema. Yeah. We're champions of the cinema.
I took my wife to see a revival of Mr. Blandings Builds His Dream House at the National Film Theatre in London. And it's a film she knew really, really well. She's seen it many, many times. But she'd never seen it in the cinema with an audience. And it made her realise the way it had been paced was to allow for audience laughter, which obviously you didn't get back at home, because it's and so what she sort of saw as being slightly awkward and slow pacing was actually perfectly natural pacing as far as the sort of big screen experience was concerned, and it was really quite she was really fascinated by that. And it's true. I mean, it's there's the famous the Woody Allen Annie Hall gag with the cocaine. They found they had to keep extending that scene because people were laughing so hard that they would miss the dialogue in the next scene, which is why for comedies, test screenings really are absolutely essential. I know they get a very bad rep, but you really do need to see how they play with an audience for full effect.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know Arsenic and Old Lace, like I said, dark screwball comedy where Cary Grant is in this relationship with Priscilla Lane. She's kind of like the girl next door. He's coming home to visit his aunts, who I believe raised him and all that kind of stuff. And come to find out, his aunts are these kind of like eccentric elderly women who are kind of taking in like boarders and people like that and murdering them and burying them in the basement. And it sounds sinister, but the way it's played for comedy or dark comedy, like they're kind of just like completely absurd in doing that, is just so wild. And I believe his brother believes he's Teddy Roosevelt, so he's leading like the charge up San Juan Hill, up and down the stairs this whole time randomly. Just when you think of Screwball and the zaniness of it, I think of Arsenic and Old Lace. I think of this. I think of Bringing Up Baby. I think of films like that, and it's just I've always really, really liked this film. And I'm just glad that it's getting a Blu-ray release. I just love Cary Grant so much. I think Priscilla Lane is also kind of an underrated actress in general. She looked really, really, had a really good presence on screen. But like I said, Eve's Bayou is really good. But Cure, the Kiyoshi Kurosawa film I wanted to mention, a dark film. Think of like David Lynch's Seven in that vibe. So the premise of this film is that there's a bunch of brutal murders happening, and they're all connected in some way, but they're all done by individual people. But these individual people seem to all have met the same person, then afterward they commit murder. And you're trying to figure out, why is that the case? Why is that happening? But the detective involved in it is also going on his own kind of existential crisis journey, dealing with a lot of personal issues as well. So the case is weighing heavily on him, very similar to, I would say, Morgan Freeman's character in Seven. If you've seen, for those of you listening, have seen that movie, which I'm assuming many of you have. And it feels very similar to that. And you get into kind of deep philosophical discussions and things like that when it comes to who is perpetrating or the cause of these murders. And it's a really, really good film. I know, Stephen, you said you'd seen it years ago, because I remember you had said that you had seen it.
Well, I think when we did our Cinema Discovery Project episode on I'm blanking the Korean film.
Was it not House of the Devil? I saw the devil.
When we talked about I Saw the Devil, this is also a Korean film, right? So
is this Japanese?
Is this Japanese? I thought for some reason I thought it was
Japanese.
Korean. Never mind.
Also, Kiyoshi Kurosawa is not related to Akira Kurosawa. Anyone asking, anyone wondering? I know people probably are. That's not the case.
No, there's other Kurosawas.
Yes,
but
it's an uncommon surname, I don't think.
Yeah. but I know at some point this got brought up. I don't know if it was maybe one of the director's other films or something, but I know I had checked this out at some point and really thought it was great. Michael, have you seen Cure?
I'm not sure. I have definitely seen Pulse, which was the film he made shortly afterwards, which I loved. Really, I mean, just really, that would actually benefit enormously from a sort of upgraded Blu-ray. But no, I've definitely seen that. I have a sort of dim memory of seeing Cure, but it may well have been sort of very late at night when I was sort of nodding in and out of consciousness, which in some ways is the best way of watching films like that. But the result, I can't actually remember if I've seen it or not. But I do very much like Kurosawa's films. I think that he's got a really distinctive sort of creepy dream logic vibe to them that
very much so
gets under your skin very, very quickly and very, very effectively.
Awesome.
That film Pulse, I remember watching a few years ago. That actually has an Arrow Blu-ray release, both in the UK as well as the US Blu-ray release too. That's why his name sounds so familiar to me.
Awesome. So let's move on.
Yeah, then La Llorona is a different take on.
It's not the Blumhouse version.
Actually, or in neither is it the 1933 Mexican version, because I did a double when I saw that.
I was going to say I have the Indicator release.
Well, I was going to say I thought this was the film Indicator had put out, and I was like, I've already seen it.
I thought, hang on a minute, we've put this out in the UK and the US. And then I discovered very quickly it was a totally different version. So that's okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of movies with this title. I was going to
say apparently that story or that myth has been adapted and evolved into so many different versions over.
There's a reason why it was picked as the first ever Mexican horror film, because it's a story people knew, and so it was a known quantity, and it's like a remake really, but a remake of a film that hadn't been made yet. And
I don't think we need to mention Night of the Living Dead. I think everyone seems to know this film, the classic George A. Romero.
It is interesting.
Zombie film from '68.
They're upgrading it to 4K, but without HDR, without high dynamic, which is. It would be interesting to see how different it looks from the already superb Blu-ray.
A lot of people don't realize the HDR is kind of what is making UHD separate from Blu-ray. That's what's bumping it up.
I find it's often not obvious what the resolution difference is, because your screen probably, I'm using a 58-inch screen, which probably isn't big enough for impact. But I do wonder if this 4K upgrade is actually going to make any difference on my system.
Yeah, even like 4K televisions, you may notice a difference between the Blu-ray and the 4K television, experiencing at home. But the HDR with the color bump and all of that stuff is what's really separating them. That's why it's interesting. A couple of companies are doing HDRs. I know recently Kino has been doing kind of HDRs with a lot of their UHD releases, because I have, a fistful of dollars and for a few dollars more. And I think Good, Bad, and the Ugly also didn't have HDR with it as well.
I mean, whether or not HDR is possible does really depend on what materials you're working with.
Very true.
If you've got the original camera negative, where you've got the sort of complete original exposure latitude, then you can do what you like. But if you haven't, and sometimes that is the case, then you are much more restricted as to how much you can maneuver, and it may simply not be worth giving it an HDR grade.
Yeah, that's the issue that Andrew Furtado talked about with Santa Sangre, was that they weren't able to do HDR on it, I think because of materials, I believe. so they had to just go out with a normal 4K without that. And then some people complained, and it's like, well, we can't really just do it, just
do
because.
It just to do it. I mean, Michael and I talked off camera about Arrow's release of Legend, where they couldn't put that in 4K at all because of the director's cut specifically.
They could, but they very sensibly decided not to, because it just would have. It was impossible. Yeah. It's impossible to do it without compromising
the things. And it would, if anything, when it comes to the director's cut, I think they said it would make the errors more prominent. Like it would show the issues with the way it would look.
Yes.
But moving on from there, that's kind of Criterion Slate in a nutshell. It's really solid release for October. So Stephen, where shall we whisk off to next?
Let's go to the lone Severin box set release.
Oh, yes. This kind of snuck in this week a little bit. This is a box set called House of Psychotic Women, 4 films. And it's Rarities collection, it says. And this is coming in a couple of different bundles, if you will. Severin loves to do their bundles, Stephen.
Oh, yes.
It's got the baddie bundle, and it has the house key bundle. And it really all depends on how much swag you want, how many goodies you want with.
I know the one main thing that comes with both bundles is Kayla Janine's book. Is in both of them bundles, but
called House of Psychotic Women.
Yeah, she
appropriately titled.
As I always say, go over to the Severin Films podcast, where they go really deep into all this stuff, deeper than we can go, and she's on there too, talking about it.
And everything. Yeah, they know it better than anyone.
Yeah, but this looks amazing. I'm excited for this.
Yeah, there's a expanded autographed hardcover with exclusive CD. I'm assuming soundtrack. They love doing the soundtrack stuff. There's this House of Psychotic Women tote bag that comes with it. There's a sleep mask. There's a scarf. There's all kind of extra stuff that comes with their more expensive, the baddie bundle set, and then the house key bundle just comes with typically the soundtrack and the book, and I think the box set is typically what's in there. But Stephen, what are the 4 movies that are in the set? The most important part.
Yes. So you have the first film's called Identikit, which I think has an alternate title, The Driver's Seat, from 1974. We have on disc 2, we have I Like Bats, which sounds like a kid made up the title for the movie, from 1986. And then from, 1975, we have on disc 3 and 4 Footprints. It's got 2 cuts, got the US cut and an Italian cut. And then on disc 5, we have the 1972 film, The Other Side of the Underneath. So yeah, did not get a chance to watch it. I wanted to watch Identikit, which
I got to watch all 4 of these actually.
Okay, well that's what you do.
Typical.
That's what you do. Yeah.
Go on, Michael.
Go ahead, Michael.
Very interesting you mentioned The Other Side of the Underneath, because that was a BFI release, and I actually sat in on the original scan from the 16mm negative back when it was made, and it was really exciting because at the time you had to be a personal friend of producer Jack Bond in order to see it, from about last shown in public in 1983, and then since then it was just completely impossible to see, and it was we were in the very, very early stages of sort of digging up and championing independent British cinema, and so it was really exciting sort of seeing it emerge.
Yeah, and it is an experience of a film to watch.
Yes,
from beginning to end, wire to wire, as they say. It's all allegory, it's all thematic, it's all chaos, and it's an examination, a critique of I don't even know how to say it. Like not schizophrenia, but like the whole kind of psychology, like mental health hospitals and all that kind of stuff at the time, all of those things. And it's all done in that way, but it's also all an allegory for the patriarchy and a critique of the patriarchy. Because Jane Arden, that was her thing, being a feminist of that time and kind of critiquing the patriarchy and how in the treatment of women, and specifically when it came to mental health. I think I've said this many times here on the podcast, and if I haven't, I want to emphasize it more. I think only within the last several years we're starting to really take mental health seriously.
Yeah.
The fact that it's way more widespread than I think people realize. It is not only people within these mental, wellness hospitals as well, but I think many people throughout our society are dealing with mental health at some type of level, and we're only now recognizing that it is a widespread thing throughout our culture. Whereas, decades and decades ago, they would kind of just stick people in these, derelict hospitals, give them shock treatment, a la One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest or something like that.
And it's why historical statistics are often completely meaningless, because it's a totally different diagnostic thing.
Yeah, and psychology in general is a very young science. It is about a century or so old, and it's not, hasn't really been relatively perfected at all. I think medical science is always changing, so it's never being perfected. But still, when it comes to psychoanalysis and all that kind of stuff, we're only about a century removed from people like Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud, and then all that stuff, which, people debate about, the merits of that as well. But it's only kind of now we're, really being more open about these things and taking these things seriously. And oftentimes when it came to women, they would kind of be treated very, very negatively when it came to things like this, things like depression, postpartum depression, which is very normal for that women go through. They wouldn't know how to handle them. They would just medicate them and things like that. But this movie's way more than that. It's a series of surreal psychological sequences that don't have any real semblance of plot, but they're all metaphorical. It's a trip of a film. It's like a David Lynch film dialed up to 1,000,000. It's truly incredible.
Absolutely. And the other thing, this is one of these sort of, it sounds trivial, but it really isn't. It is the only British feature film in the whole of the 70s directed by a woman.
Oh, wow.
Not surprising. There were not a lot of women, even in American film. Even in American film that weren't directing.
As soon as I heard that, I thought, well, that's got to be wrong. I'm going to determine to disprove that. And I haven't. The closest I've come is 1980, which isn't really in the 70s. So, but yeah.
And I know Jane Arden, from the research that I was doing, it was actually an adaptation of her own play.
Yes.
And that she brought all the actresses that were in it were people from her her theater troupe and stuff like that. And her play was very much like this. Just incredible, genius work. It really is, but it's not going to be for everyone. I can definitely say that. But swinging kind of like the other end of the spectrum a bit, I want to go back to the first film, this Identikit, specifically because it stars one of my all-time favorites in Elizabeth Taylor. I think Elizabeth Taylor is one of the greatest actresses ever, just a stunning movie star. And it just shows it's always fascinating to me, the career trajectories of a lot of these prominent, well-known actors and actresses, and you see where they end up going towards certain parts of their career, because, things ebb and flow and all that kind of stuff. So this is post Cleopatra, Elizabeth Taylor. This film is very, very interesting. Yet again, it's another film dealing with just bizarre and just wild scenario of Elizabeth Taylor as a disturbed woman who is traveling around Rome and Europe, and she's just kind of traveling aimlessly and trying, and she knows she's searching for someone. She doesn't know who. She'll just know it when she finds it. So she ends up just running into all of these scenarios, trying to figure out this existential crisis that she's on. Fascinating film, just fascinating film. I don't know, how do you feel about the title, The Driver's Seat, Stephen?
I can't speak much to it because I haven't watched it, but I like Identikit more. It sounds
Identikit seems more mysterious.
Yeah.
Like, what does Identikit mean? Is it a play on identity? Is it a play on something like that? And Andy Warhol shows up in this movie at some point as well. It's a very unique film. All of these films are unique. I Like Bats is it's not quite a vampire film, but it has vampiric elements within it, and it's interesting. I don't want to say too much to it. A lot of these films are kind of tough to go through. They all have women at the center of it, and they all have women dealing with psychological things. Even Footprints as well. Footprints I think is the one that was more, I think, well known when I was just looking on Letterboxd and looking on IMDb and stuff like that. This film is the one that I think a lot of people or really, really like. And it's about this woman who has this kind of memory loss. She's missing a couple of days in her life, and she's trying to figure out, just fill in the gaps. And she's trying to fill in the gaps, and she's just going around to these different places to kind of figure out what she was doing. Why is her name not the name that she was giving people? Why did she have a different haircut? All of these things, and you start to peel back the layers as to what actually happened to her and stuff like that. But she keeps having these dreams of people being left on the moon, and it's a whole metaphor of, I think, her identity being lost or something like that. And for some random reason, Klaus Kinski is one of the astronauts who's on the moon, or he's like on there, so you see him in like a few seconds of the movie, and I was like, is that Klaus Kinski? Because if you blink, you miss it. But he's in there. I saw someone review the film, I think it was Letterboxd. They gave it a super low rating because they had the impression that Klaus Kinski was going to be like a main character in the movie, and he's in it for like a minute. It's really, really interesting.
Is that how the copy they watched was publicized? Because that wouldn't surprise
it could very well have been. It wouldn't be the first time someone's done that, where they're like, yeah, featuring such and such actor, and they're hardly in the movie at all. But yeah, that's this set here. Once again, Severin pulling out stuff out of the ether to kind of deliver to us. So just fascinating works.
And what's really interesting, they're also billing it up front as being around a particular critic's sort of taste and selection, which is you often see in, or reasonably often see in cinemas, but not so often at all in sort of physical media.
Oh, very much so. Yeah, Kayla Janice. It's kind of based around her book.
Yeah, absolutely.
It literally their whole press release here is, this book was published, House of Psychotic Women, 2012, and it's all about female neuroses in horror and exploitation films. And that's what this box I gave
which also makes me think that there's possibility for another set.
Oh,
for more sets.
So. After seeing the set,
because the book references tons of films in that genre. So maybe they're able to get acquisition to some of these other films and make another set.
Well, if it does well enough, that probably is exactly the way their minds are going to work, and why not?
Yeah. All right.
Nice.
Well, let's move on to Imprint.
Yes, let's go to Imprint. Steven, you want to take this? I feel like I've been talking way too much.
Yeah, I was going to say your voice is starting to go.
I'm dying here. Yeah.
All right. So Imprint, as usual, big slate.
About 7 films. No,
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8.
Oh,
1,
8. I was
2,
way
3,
off.
4, 5, 6. Yeah, 8. So no box set this month, but a lot of releases here for October. We have 1979's North Dallas 40, 1983's Testament, Save the Tiger from 1973, The Molly Maguires from 1970, Pretty Baby from 1978, 1952's Comeback, Little Sheba, Warning Shot from 1967, and The Rose Tattoo from 1955. So an array of films from the 50s to the 80s. And I'm really loving this slate. I watched a few of these.
Nice. Probably
my favorite of this slate. It's tough because a couple of them I really liked, but I'm a big Burt Lancaster fan. So Come Back to Little Sheba was something I hadn't seen before, and seeing it for the first time here was amazing. A great, kind of character study type of film, about, not only about alcoholism, but like marriage, like relationships in general, where these two people who had gotten married for a particular reason, that reason's taken away from them very early on. And then they stay together, and it gets into the resentments. And then in the story, this young girl comes to stay there who's a college student in their house, and it kind of like brings back old wounds, and like they're dealing. So it's a very great, just, I think it doesn't overstay its welcome. It's really well acted. Burt Lancaster's fantastic. And then his wife, what's the actress's name that plays his wife?
Shirley
she's great.
Booth.
Yeah, she's
Shirley
great
Booth.
too.
Yeah, she won an Oscar for her performance in this film.
Yeah, it's deserved because, part, the movie kind of goes back and forth in my mind about like, where your stance is until you understand that where Burt Lancaster's character is kind of is an alcoholic that has some resentments. You could almost see how maybe her character, the wife's character, is kind of annoying, but you also see throughout the movie where her mental state is and why she's acting the way she is, because she's trying to hold on to something that she lost too. She's still grieving. She just didn't grieve the same way as Burt Lancaster did. And so it really is a layered film. And that,
these are two people who have heavy weights on them psychologically, and it's impacting their relationships as well as their lives. And, Burt Lancaster, I find to be very expressive when it comes to those things. I saw this a couple of years ago. I think I made references before. The Criterion channel had a whole Burt Lancaster collection. And I think in January of 2020, this was, right before COVID and everything, I just went on a Burt Lancaster marathon and just watched everything that was in there. And Come Back Little Sheba was in it, as well as The Rose Tattoo, which is also, I think, directed by the same director, Daniel Mann. Yeah. Different type of film, obviously, but Come Back Little Sheba, I think, is definitely one I would recommend to people.
Yeah, Michael, have you seen?
I haven't seen Come Back Little Sheba, although I have been going through a bit of a sort of Burt Lancaster thing, not least professionally, because I've just done The Swimmer and Kiss the Blood Off My Hands back to back. So more by luck than planning. A lot of Burt Lancaster releases, and he's just a fascinating actor. Sounds absolutely terrifying to work with. But automatic interest in seeing pretty much anything from around that period. So it is on my to watch list.
Yeah, and the other couple that I saw, Save the Tiger with Jack Lemmon. Now I know Jack Lemmon won the Oscar for this role.
For this film, yes.
Yeah, and he's fantastic as well. Like it's
great. It's a really great screenplay.
Such a, once again, a layered performance where this man who's was a veteran and is now like a businessman, and like he's dealing with like he's kind of got this great attitude about like he is an older man, but he's not like, he doesn't look at the young generation as somebody that's like, these kids are acting a fool or anything. He almost sympathizes with the way young people are. And I guess this is set in the 70s. And so that whole, hippie era, he looks at them and doesn't say, oh, them hippies, they're acting crazy. He looks at them and he's like, they have a cause and they're doing what they're doing. And he kind of like sympathizes with them. And that's what I love about the character of the whole movie, is that he's not really judgmental. He kind of now, of course, he has a wife, and he's like, technically he cheats on his wife in the movie, but so that doesn't make him a great person.
This movie is moralistically great, to say the least.
And of course, the situation going on with his business is a whole other thing.
He runs a fashion business where I think it's like, manufacturing and whatnot, and he's got to do whatever he can to make this business stay afloat, whether that means, quelling arguments in an office, whether it means paying off people in certain areas to do certain things, commit certain crimes, whatever the case may be, he's got to get it done. And he's very frugal about that. And he's just like, it's what he has to do. And it does weigh on him a lot, because he's got a lot of, not regret in life, but he really misses his youth. Like I feel like his younger years really passed him by, and he really misses them a lot, because he reminisces a lot when it comes to not only his wartime stuff, because he references his wartime things in World War II, but also like the old music and the old style, the old, stuff like that. And, even the stuff he references is stuff that's like, 30 years old or, 20 years old. And what I find to be so universal about that is I feel like that happens in every generation, where the older generation is always hearkening back to their time and their lives and what was going on when they were young. And, I've said this before, where that seems to happen all the time. And then sometimes that can translate into the older generations attacking the generations coming up. But that doesn't seem to be too much the case in this film. It feels more it's on him, where he feels all of that weight and all of that regret and all of that loss. And he's not taking it out on the younger generation, which we do see a lot in our society. What we're seeing in the film is that it's kind of imploding him, from the inside. He's kind of crushing himself with all of this weight. Very existential again. And Jack Lemmon is such a dynamic actor. He's typically known as the comedian and stuff like that. When you see films like
Odd Couple,
Some Like It Hot, you see films like The Apartment and things like that. But then I think of like Days of Wine and Roses, the Blake Edwards film. I think of, when it's a dark film.
Yeah.
And this film is kind of in that same vein, not quite as dark. Days of Wine and Roses dealing with alcoholism and kind of the degradation of a relationship because of, those type of vices. But this is dealing with kind of more of isolation and stuff like that. Really great performance by Jack Lemmon.
Yeah.
Kind of one of the all-time best.
It's great.
Dynamic actors.
You've seen this, Michael? Have you seen Save the Tiger?
I have not seen Save the Tiger, but yes, Jack Lemmon as a dramatic actor is incredible. I mean, China Syndrome, I don't think you mentioned.
Yes.
Great one. Missing is, in fact, I remember. I think when Costa Gavras was casting it, one of the actors he had in mind was Ed Asner, who actually would have been fine in that part, but Costa Gavras ultimately thought he was too angry. Jack Lemmon could do a sort of world weariness that's what actually made the character. It's a brilliant performance.
Jack Lemmon could do that. Like, he could be angry, but it was almost like the frustrated angry, not the vitriol angry.
Yes,
not like
that was the crucial distinction that Costa Gavras sort of spotted, and it's why Lemmon was cast. And I think it's an absolutely flawless performance.
I think of like The Out of Towners, where it's just like a series of unfortunate events that just causes him to go crazy. Just that frustrating world weariness, like just the world beating you down. That's what I feel like Jack Lemmon kind of gave to us. And then he could also switch it up and be the most jovial looking character you've ever seen on screen as well. Just an incredible dynamic actor. I think Save the Tiger, definitely from this slate, is one that I would recommend to people, because I don't believe, I gotta check to see if it has a release anyplace else. It doesn't. It has no release here in the US, none in the UK, none in any other country. So this is kind of like a world premiere of Save the Tiger. This is directed by John G. Alvinson, actually.
Yeah.
Who, of course, after this would direct Rocky and Karate Kid and stuff like that.
Very popular fare.
Yeah, more popular fare.
Yeah.
But also Rocky being rather existential as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, that's a good slate of films. I did get to see North Dallas 40 as well, which I think is another one that a lot of people were really buzzing about when it came to this release slate. It's the film starring Nick Nolte as a football player in the 70s, and the movie is kind of a critique of professional football in the United States in the 70s, like, players going out and partying, doing drugs, taking painkillers to get through injuries, all this kind of stuff. And at the center of it is Nick Nolte's character. It's a good Nick Nolte performance. I think, this is getting a 4K scan from Paramount Pictures. It's getting a new audio commentary, new introduction, a lot of new special features when it comes to that release.
That's back-to-back months with Nick Nolte in the sports films.
Yes.
Because we got Blue Chips last month.
We got Blue Chips, we got basketball, and now we have American football. But Save the Tiger is also getting a new audio commentary. It's getting a video essay about John G. Alvinson's work, interview by Lloyd Kaufman.
Oh, nice.
Oh, from Trauma fame.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool. But and then Little Sheba, audio commentary. Something about Burt Lancaster, Rose Tattoo, getting audio commentary and stuff like that. A Warning Shot. I felt like we just talked about this movie last week.
We did.
Because Kino's putting it out.
Kino's putting
and now
it out
they're
as well.
putting it out. And it gave us two opportunities to watch this movie, and neither of us watched it.
Still didn't watch it.
Yet again, still directed by Buzz Kulick, who directed The Hunter, which is one of I believe Steve McQueen's last film.
I think it's actually literally his last film, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. And it was also put out by Imprint as well sometime this year. So that was kind of a connection that I made last week. I guess I'll just remake it now. For those of you who didn't listen to last week's episode. Or if
now
so,
I did watch Testament is the other one I watched.
Oh, I did watch Testament as well.
Yeah.
What a depressing movie.
It is.
Goodness.
But I loved it. I loved it.
It's one of those
yeah. comedy though with that subject.
It's a great movie.
It's like The Day After Tomorrow. Not The Day After Tomorrow. The Day After. Steve, what's the one that came out in the 80s? The Day After, right?
Yeah. Yeah, The Day After, yeah.
Yeah, and it's because it's in that same vein. I don't know. The 80s had that idea of like, what would happen if
it's the scare, the nuclear used, scare,
It's it's the whole fear of U.S. versus the Soviet Union, which was very real, obviously, at the time. But this film is like The Day After, but way less dramatic and just more like morose.
Well, I would say, it's definitely dramatic, but I think it's very it's hands off when it comes to showing you anything to do with the actual nuclear fallout, except for slowly showing people dying from nuclear
radiation poisoning.
Yeah, radiation poisoning and things like that.
Like The Day After felt more theatrical, there's large fields of people dying. It's very plays it up to the true dramatics of what a nuclear event would be. This takes place in one town centered around really one family, one community, very isolated. You get no real context when it comes to the political angle of a nuclear event or anything like that. You just see kind of what would happen on a very practical level. And it's very depressing because obviously
it is. The closest
radiation poisoning is depressing. Big shocker.
Yeah. The closest we get to any kind of flashiness is literally the flash of
when
the bomb.
Event happens.
Yeah, when it happens, the day it happens, and then it's over, and then from there everybody's kind of in the dark. They don't know.
If anything, it's more not depraved, but more depressing because of that isolation, that loneliness, that slow.
Do we stay? Do we go seek out help?
Yeah, it's the slow, slow death of humanity, which is really, really depressing stuff.
Yeah.
But a very young Kevin Costner is in the film for a few moments. I don't know why a lot of the stills I saw for this movie show him when he's only in the couple of scenes, but this is, I believe this one came out in 1983. This would be before he would be really in anything significant. This would even be before he's in, right around the time he's in Night Shift in that one.
Yeah, well, I think this might be after Night Shift, but it's before he started kind of starring the recent releases of Fandango. This is before that.
Yeah, this is even before that.
Yeah.
So it's film. If you're into kind of that 80s kind of subgenre of nuclear event films, I guess. That's Testament.
Well, the benchmark for that, which you haven't mentioned probably because it's a British TV production, is something called Threads from about 1984, which is very possibly the bleakest thing I have ever seen in my entire life. And I think I can't remember the chronology, but I think when Testament opened, I think it did suffer from comparison with Threads because we'd all been absolutely by Threads and thought, oh, well, this is, slightly more upbeat than that.
All right. But yeah, now I have to go search out that because I did like Testament. So now, if I could see the more depressing version.
Now, was that you were saying, Michael? That's a TV.
It's TV, but I think it came out on Blu-ray and not that ago. I must investigate. It was first shown. The other one, of course, which was shown in the 80s,
it did.
Made in the 60s, was Peter Watkins' legendary The War Game, where he was the BBC's golden boy, and he made Culloden and everyone loved it. And the BBC said, well, what do you want to do now? And he said, I'd like to do a realistic film about a nuclear attack, please. And they said, yeah, fine, go ahead. And the result was so horrifying. It wasn't shown on television for 21 years. I remember that. And it's still, it's obviously in black and white, but it still packs one hell of a punch. And that's BFI put that out on Blu-ray a few years ago.
Yeah, for anyone interested, Threads did come out on Blu-ray here in the States, actually put out by Severin.
Oh, right.
That's
where I read about it.
Yeah, that's the connection. I guess that's the connection.
Well, very, very highly recommended if you're not feeling suicidal.
But
it is just, obviously.
Bleak. Oh, yeah. Those films like that, like End of the World films, are rather bleak.
But it is incredibly powerful. Virtually everyone of my generation saw it at the time and have never forgotten it.
All right. Well, let's
move on.
I was going to say, let's go ahead and move on to our last
the
subject here. And this is one where Michael can really get into this.
Yeah, this is going to be his podcast for a moment.
Now, Michael, you're gonna have to rein yourself in just a little bit because we are going pretty long. But like,
I probably will be able to because I haven't seen anything anywhere close to every film.
Okay, cool.
I would say just the kind of the context who Michael J. Murphy is. I don't think anyone even knows who.
Yes, it was. It was well. We're talking about the box set "Myth, Magic, and Mutilation," the micro-budget films of Michael J. Murphy, which is a wonderfully alliterative title that one of my colleagues came up with. And I'm very glad they put the word micro-budget in the title because it's very good. We're getting these films. We are talking seriously cheap production values.
Yes.
We're right down to the sort of Al Adamson, Andy Milligan kind of level. People were sort of trying to compare him with Norman J. Warren, but Norman J. Warren did make, he made professional 35mm productions with.
These are more like 16mm, even 8mm stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of them were shot on film. The later ones were shot on video, because and they were if they got distribution at all, it tended to be on VHS for the most part. I mean, he just started off as an enthusiastic amateur filmmaker. I think he was born in 1950. Started making films in his teens. We've actually got clips from some of the stuff in a film called Baudelaire that he, a lavish costume drama that he made when he must have been about sort of 17, 18, something like that. And he basically never stopped. He never hit the big time, but he carried on making films regularly till 2015, the year of his death. The box set, I think there are 30. We've identified 30 films. So you're dealing with a filmmaker like this, is quite hard to be absolutely precise, but we've identified about 30 films, of which 26 survive. All of them are being included in the box. So to all intents and purposes, it is the complete Michael J. Murphy filmography. You will never need to buy another Michael J. Murphy release again. We are going out of our way to try to make this absolutely definitive. We've hired a guest co-producer, Wayne McGinn, who was involved with the DVD release of Murphy's films when he was still alive. So he knew him, and he's probably, I think without any exaggeration, the world's leading expert on Michael J. Murphy. There aren't that many contenders, but it's good to have someone who really knows this stuff backwards. And at the moment, emails are flying thick and fast. In fact, a couple came through while we were talking about, usually about, for the most part, about some really obscure technical matters to do with. We've just discovered that one of the 16mm scans, the soundtrack doesn't fit absolutely perfectly, so we've got to decide what to do about that kind of thing. But it's in very, very safe hands. And yes, as for the films, they are. They're fascinating, actually. They reminded me a bit of Tim Lucas's famous comments that in order to understand Jess Franco's work, you have to see all of it. I don't actually think that's necessarily true of Franco. And very few people, with the possible exception of Stephen Throw, have seen all of it. But with Michael J. Murphy, I think you do need to see several to really get to sort of start to appreciate sort of recurring themes, certainly recurring actors, recurring locations, recurring treatments, recurring low budget solutions to creative challenges. They can be wonderfully resourceful. I mean, you can obviously, you watch a film like Atlantis, a large part of which is set in an underground city. Very obviously. Papier-mâché sets and suspiciously smooth floors.
Oh, yeah.
I actually watched that one, and
did you find? I tried to find it. I couldn't find it.
Yeah, it's on YouTube.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, and there's a scene where somebody gets thrown back into water, and it's obviously like a pool. Like somebody gets thrown into a pool, I think. And they're near the ocean, but then somebody gets thrown into a pool. And then when you get the close-up shot.
Speaking of, I watched Death Run, and that entire movie must have been shot in, I want to say a landfill. It looked like it was shot in a landfill.
Yes.
It's just because there was just, it was a dystopian film, so they wanted to make the world look dystopian. And what looks more dystopian, just derelict scrap metal everywhere, and just
there's
parts of cars.
There's a famous gravel pit, which turns up over and over again in BBC produced sci-fi things like Doctor Who and Blake Seven and stuff. It's just a really favourite location. But yeah, he would sort of film around where he was based in sort of Portsmouth on the south coast, and the landfill site. You want a post-apocalyptic environment, a landfill site is as good a one as any.
And I love that. I've talked about that with other releases. Because we've dabbled in filmmaking, and that's what we have to do. We don't have no budget, so you go and you try to make something out of nothing. That's what's fun. Can be so fun about filmmaking is even sometimes it doesn't always turn out great, but it's great in the pursuit of it, like trying to get something to look as the production value to look as good as possible.
Yeah.
And when you get it, when you do it right and you look at it, the final product, you're like, you got so many stories from just trying to do this one thing, that it's worth it, yes. And that's probably why he kept doing it for so many years.
Absolutely. And he tends to, the same people pop up over and over again. So they were clearly good friends of his. And there are, they're the ones I haven't come anywhere close to watching them all yet, because I've only just started working on putting the discs together proper. But the ones I've seen have, you obviously have to make allowances for budget and production values, but we make that quite clear on the box. But the ones that they're terrifically entertaining. There are plenty of ideas. There's some great, there's some great moments where you can't quite believe what you're watching. And as you say, I mean, I've dabbled in amateur filmmaking as well. And something I really enjoyed working on earlier this year were the 2 amateur shorts that went on the Stanley Long film, the Can You Keep It Up With This, That and the Other for a Week, and Adventures of a Plumber Without Outer Space, which again were made for virtually no money. But I just love the fact that they took it upon themselves to go out and make homages to really terrible 1970s British sex comedies.
Yeah.
And there was a bit where we were subtitling it actually for the hard of hearing, and one of my colleagues said, "Oh, isn't that a rumble of thunder there?" And I said, "No, that's the sound of the wind hitting the mic," which any amateur filmmaker will recognise immediately. And so we left that one unsubtitled.
Yeah, and for those of you interested in kind of more detailed look at this set, obviously you can go to powerhousefilms.co.uk. But it is, I think 17 of these films are getting all new for 2K restorations done by Powerhouse, which is something that I think is kind of not unique to this year, but I think you're seeing more that you guys are doing your own restorations and your own stuff like that with a lot of these titles.
We've done a lot more, certainly, yes. I think we did a handful around about sort of 2019, but then it's been getting, it's just one of these things. The more successful you are, the more money.
With how you describe Sam, he's going to want to be completely involved in all aspects. So the restoration is, probably another thing.
Yeah, the actual restoration is done by sort of Final Frame.
Well, sure.
In London, and in general, I don't. I just deal with the digital files of the end result of that.
Yeah, and when
it is great. I mean, working on something like this, or the Pemini organization from a few months back, where these films have not been seen for half a century.
Oh yeah, I would say
the filmmakers were astonished that they even survived.
Yeah, I think
we had to patch bits of it up with because we only had battered release prints and then a pneumatic analog video transfers that they made, and we were able to patch up the missing bits with that. But it's
and I think with a lot of like we were saying off camera before the show, indicators, one of their main things is digging up a lot of archival, deeply cut, and a lot of obscured, unseen British films that are being kind of lost through British cinema.
Yes.
Kind of lost in time.
Yes.
And that seems to be very much the case with this set here, just digging through this massive archive here, because it is 26 films. So many of them are shorts. Like you said, many of them were shot on film. Some of them were shot on videotape. And it's just kind of a massive undertaking to kind of unearth a lot of these things. And it's something I think a lot of the consumers have to be aware of, that it's not always going to be like a mainstream type of release here. It's going to be a lot of deeper cut stuff.
Oh yeah, we don't want to misrepresent it. I mean, I think hopefully people will buy it, will know exactly what they're getting into. But yeah, it is. I mean, it's one. I've never worked on a project quite like this, where we are basically trying to offer a complete filmography in a box, which is normally pretty much impossible because the rights are scattered all over the place. And Criterion did an amazing job with their Ingmar Bergman box set, but there were a few omissions from that. Yeah. Even more omissions from their Fellini box. I think the French Eric Romer box, because Romer made pretty much everything for his own production company, I think that really is complete. But there aren't that many others because once you get more than one rights holder involved, it just gets very, very complicated.
Yeah, and I think the further back you go into history, the more complicated things get, because film production, the history of film production is so massive and so intricate that it's just you don't know who owns what, where were things made, who owns what, who owns the best of things, who owns the worst of things. I mean, it's just archiving must be incredible.
Yeah, I mean, because sometimes you have a case where a film for various historical reasons has different rights holders on different sides of the Atlantic. For example, the RKO catalogue ended up with Warner Brothers in the US and Universal in the UK, but Warner Brothers ended up with the film elements. So their Blu-ray releases of RKO titles simply look better than the Universal ones because they have to work from sort of second generation materials or worse. It's that's just the way things are.
Yeah, like international rights must get even more confusing.
We've been in a similar situation.
So when it comes to Indicator and kind of acquiring all of this material for this box set here, was it a matter of going to the estate of Michael J. Murphy, or was that more like, is that too technical to ask?
Well, it's the co-producer of this film is a guy called Wome McGinn, who is probably the world's leading expert on Michael J. Murphy. He was involved with getting his films out on DVD when Murphy was still alive, and so he knows where everything is. And he's been he's been giving me increasingly large amounts of sort of archival material, which one of my jobs is to sort of beat it into some kind of coherent shape. I mean, for example, we have a documentary from the 1970s which includes clips from now lost films, and so what I'm doing is I'm extracting those clips, and we're going to present that as a sort of montage of the film Bodicea, which he made as a teenager. We've got a couple of minutes of that, which is obviously better than nothing, but because nobody knows where the full version is now. Things like that. We're just sifting through this huge archive of material to see what's going to actually shed useful light, and also again we've got the multiple versions. There are different credit title sequences depending on whether it's a film version or a video version or whatever, and we'll probably offer an option to play as many different versions as possible, but it just depends on what's feasible. But the intention is certainly to make it absolutely definitive. I mean, we have really
this being dubbed as kind of the biggest Indicator, release. I think that's not only literal, but it's also kind of more. What's the word I'm looking for?
They've never done a 10-disc.
It's ambitious. It's an ambitious.
I would say more literal and metaphorical as well. They've never done a set quite this big.
Features until now, which I think was 10 features in a feature-length TV movie, so 11. But this is.
I think didn't the May West box set have 10 films?
It did, but a lot of them were 2 to a disc because
it was I believe a 5 disc set.
I have it right here.
Yeah,
it's only about 6 discs. 6. I don't think there's been anything bigger than 6. So.
So this is going to be a massive set.
It is going to be absolutely crammed.
It is coming with a 120-page book as well, which is that's a book. That's not a booklet. That's massive.
It's actually the whole booklet book distinction, which is something I've always been very interested in, having worked on the things as little as 24 pages and as much as 120 pages. 350 pages in the Borowczyk thing. That just got a lot bigger than expected. It turns out there's a very handy definition by UNESCO of the distinction between a pamphlet and a book, which is 50 pages. And as coincidence would have it, 40 pages is officially the most that you can fit into a standard Amaray or Scanovo case. I've occasionally pushed it to 44, but it's always a gamble, and I'm being told not to. So anything above that, so above 50, as far as we're concerned, is a book, and 120 pages is definitely a book. And again, one interesting thing about Indicator is they have a completely separate booklet editing department run by Jeff Billington, who does a wonderful job. Because all other projects I've worked on, I've also been involved with overseeing the booklet, which I love doing, but it's just you're trying to do that and the disc and lots of other things at the same time, and the workload's enormous. So it's great that my only input into the books is proofreading them. But they're always a terrific. I think Jeff does an amazing job with them. It's which I think is a byproduct of having a dedicated editor.
Yeah, this is also coming chock full of special features. It says here 34 hours worth of film content. That's a lot. That's a lot to go through. I think
that's before the extras.
And that's before the extras as well. And there's all kind of extras like audio commentaries, 3-part documentary about I think assessing just Murphy's looks like life and career, essentially.
Which is what I'm excited about the most, because it's our way into learning more about him,
about who he is, who he was,
Yeah.
And just his work. I think his work definitely speaks for itself. It's so unique and just so interesting. Just the things that he got in, the kind of the genres that he wanted to get into and just kind of put out there. He made it happen on these super low budgets.
And the other interesting thing is that people in Britain generally weren't making much in the way of the kind of genre films he was making.
Right. Yes.
Fantasy epics and so on. The British film industry was not really supporting stuff like that. So yeah.
Yeah, I watched one of the later I think it's one of his last films, Roxy. I watched that as well. And it's very much almost like a melodramatic kind of thriller of a step son who's with the stepmother. They're waiting on the father to come meet them somewhere, and then he goes missing, and then it's kind of like a little bit of a kind of giallo, but not really, because it doesn't have the Italianness, bleeding all over it. But I've seen two spectrums. I watched Roxy and I watched Atlantis. So them are like two different spectrum of what he did as a filmmaker. So I can't wait to see, because with the title that you guys named for this box set, Magic, Myth, and Mutilation, I want to see that all come to fruition, because I've seen maybe a little bit of magic, and I've seen maybe just a tad bit of mutilation.
I've seen most of the mutilation.
I watched a bit of mutilation. Yeah, it's not a box set for people who don't like mutilation.
Yeah, I watched Bloodstream, which obviously is actually, it's kind of interesting that you mentioned giallo, Steve, because Bloodstream is it's not quite giallo, but it's got some of the elements to it. It's dealing with vengeful murders and stuff like that, where it's kind of meta, if you will, way before meta was even a concept, where this filmmaker kind of makes this movie, and he gets screwed over by the studio that's kind of steals this movie from him, and he gets revenge on them by murdering them and filming it, I guess. And it's kind of it feels like a giallo thing. It feels very much like All About Evil, Stephen.
I was thinking that. Yeah. But this was before that, so
early
years before that.
Yeah,
83, something like that. It's possibly 80. I can't remember the date off the top of my head, but yeah.
Yeah, so this is a pre-order. I already pre-ordered this. This is something I whenever you guys or whenever Severin or
you're a box set completist, so
yeah, I'm a big.
This was going to happen no matter.
I'm a box set completist on Indicator, so I don't miss any of your box sets. But
there's no questioning here when it came to Steven.
No, but whenever especially, I mean, like Severin's the other label that comes to mind when it comes to these like obscure filmmakers, like you said, Andy Milligan or Al Adamson, now Ray Dennis Steckler, are introducing me and all of us to filmmakers we might have never even thought
people we've probably never heard of and whose works don't see the light of day.
And the whole sort of deep dive box set approach, I think I love that idea that you can really, because in a lot of the cases you do need to see more than one of these films to get a real idea of what their appeal is. It's been very interesting seeing. We announced the box set yesterday, and it's been very interesting seeing the reactions, because people who knew Michael J. Murphy's work well were absolutely ecstatic, unsurprisingly. Hey, do you want to this guy's entire filmography? Well, yes, please. People who'd only seen one or two were prepared to give it the benefit of the doubt, because they thought, obviously, if a label like Indicator is going to devote this level of time and expense to restoring 26 films, they probably can see something in it. And obviously we got lots of, there are people who think we should only be doing classic Hollywood and stuff like that. And, we've just done a Universal Noir box set. We've just done a Bogart box set. We've just done The Swimmer. I think we've covered that pretty well.
Yeah. I think
in a different direction.
Well, as we've talked about before,
there's a balance.
There's a balance. I think Indicator's made it pretty known that there's really not a limitation. I mean, I think you guys have, I think your brand, I think the brand in my eyes is definitely, obscure and hidden gems, but there's also not like a limit on genre. You're willing to go to any genre.
We got as you know, because I think you talked about it with John and Sam, we got a fairly vitriolic reaction to the Stanley Long stuff.
Yes.
You shouldn't be doing sort of softcore sex comedies, but why not? It was like it or not, it is a historical fact that it was one of the major commercial genres in 1970s British cinema, and we do a lot of 1970s British cinema. So it was,
it's
we were inevitably going to tackle that, and
it's part of the tapestry. It's part of the tapestry of British cinema. I'll be honest, from a U.S. perspective, from a U.S. viewer perspective, we don't get to learn a lot about the history of cinema outside of ourselves. We don't get to learn about the history of British cinema unless it's taught to us in school, in film schools or whatever, or we seek it out by ourselves. We learn a lot about our own U.S. cinema history here because we're kind of living it every day. Movies keep coming out, and we learn about movie stars and whatnot because of the whole pop culture of it all. But we don't learn a lot about British cinema history. It's very different. I think I've brought this up a lot of times, where I think Michael, you can even say this too. The kind of the revival of cinema here in the U.S. was in the 1970s with New Hollywood, whereas in Great Britain it was the 80s. It was a revival of cinema. In the UK.
I think there was a general feeling it couldn't go on the way it was. I mean, the 70s. I mean, you got that wonderful period where the major studios were pulling out, but as they pulled out, they were funding films by people like Nicholas Roeg and Ken Russell, which would never have been funded under almost any other situation. But yeah, no, it was definitely it was TV sitcom spin-offs and softcore sex comedies were absolutely ruled the roost for. And then in the early 80s, we got Channel 4 became a major player. We got people like sort of Palace Pictures, and there was a really concerted effort to try and create a more distinctive British cinema. But it's like I love looking at more disreputable parts of film history to see what was going on there, because quite often it's something that's really, they may not be greatest films, but they're really, really sort of culturally interesting, particularly
I think context also matters too. It's like why were these films being made at the time? Is this what the audience wanted? Is this what was selling?
A film is an expensive thing to embark on, and so why
it's kind of the same way in the US, where
you need
80s was action films and science fiction, and like horror slashers was all 1980s stuff, which people still go back to and love to this day, and they're still making those movies to this day, and it's like that because that's what was selling, that's what was booming at the time. So it's all part of the tapestry.
As soon as you get a hit like we've had a sort of double hit like Halloween and Friday the 13th, these are, you can see why people jumped on the bandwagon, because slasher films are not that expensive to make. And
all right, well, that's going to be it for this episode of Chasing Labels. Michael, thank you for joining us, man. You we could have just let you talk the whole time. No. I'm just messing with you. No, but I like anytime because we've had a few guests that just have this way about them where they just can spew out information, and we just got to sit back and let them go. And then we have to finally be like, okay, stop. Okay. But it's great. I think it's great. And it's one of them. And it's them episodes where I kind of go back sometimes and listen to them again, because there's something I probably missed in our conversation that I want to pull back out and be like, okay, I'm going to look into that. So, but Michael, thank you for spending time with us.
Thank you for inviting me on. No, it's been great. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and we'll have to have you back again, man. We'll have to bring you back and
let me know. Yeah. I mean, one thing I didn't mention is that I'm working on Michael J. Murphy during the day, and in the evening I'm working on a 3 back-to-back serious high art film commentary. So
man,
which unfortunately I can't say what they are yet, but it's a bit like when I was working on Stanley Long Adventures, and at the same time doing a commentary for Miklos Janczar's The Roundup for Kino. It's I love flipping back and forth with that stuff.
It keeps you balanced.
It does. Yeah.
But where would be the best people for if they wanted to contact you or reach out to you? Where would they go?
Probably. Well, the way you contact me is me via Twitter, which is Marble Ice Hook. One word. It's an anagram of my name, because all the other permutations were taken. But yeah, absolutely. That's I'm usually on there recently.
All right, Andrew, where can they find you?
Oh, you can find me on Twitter as well at Kevzilla06, as well as our YouTube channel Chasing Labels.
And you can find me on Facebook, Stephen Billings. You can find me at the other Chasing Labels pages, whether it be our Twitter, Instagram, or you can find me at my Letterboxd at Chasing Labels. You can also find the audio for the podcast at Podbean, Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, and other places. Thanks again for listening. And hey, keep on watching them movies.
I know I will.